A wagon travels down a quiet road through a valley, while a letter to a guy named Darrett mentions the city of Militer, and Darrett holds the folded note in his hands, thinking about the city he's heading toward. He looks down at the paper with a small smile and says the whole thing really takes him back. The town is packed with houses and has a massive castle sitting right at the back. But things weren't always going this well because a few weeks back in the rural city of Lighton, things were actually looking pretty rough for him. Over at the blacksmith guild, someone inside sounds completely caught off guard by some news and Darrett stands there in shock, asking if they're seriously exiling him while the people in charge just walk away. The blacksmith looks totally stressed out and just wants to know why this is happening to him. The guild leader yells that Darrett doesn't bring any benefits to the group and they have to cut him for the sake of the guild, but Darrett asks if they can explain it a bit better, only for the guy to tell him he's basically just a waste of money. Guildmaster Sinyan doesn't have any time for talk and yells that he's way too busy to deal with this, making it very clear that Darrett is officially banished from the guild right now. Sinyan keeps shouting for him to just hurry up and get out because he has better things to do, so Darrett just awkwardly waves and says he'll leave immediately. But as the blacksmith walks away looking pretty confused about the whole thing, a nasty smirk grows on the guild master's face. Sinyan watches him go with a gross look, thinking about how there is absolutely no way he's ever letting the guy return. The door slams shut with a loud bang, leaving Darrett completely on his own, and after traveling for a while, the wagon driver tells him they've finally made it to the destination. Darrett hands a little kid a toy he worked on and tells him it's all fixed up. The kid is super hyped and yells about how the horse toy actually moves now, while the wagon starts pulling away and the little guy yells back a big thank you to the man who helped him. Darrett looks at his worn-out hand and thinks about how he spent 30 long years totally devoted to working the forge. Darrett waves goodbye, thinking about how much he's changed and realizing he's officially an old guy now, as he heads into the royal capital of the Kingdom of Grossa. The place is huge and way more crowded than Lighton, with people and shops everywhere. He walks through the busy market streets, taking in all the noise and energy of the city until it hits him that he's never actually left his hometown before. He starts thinking that getting kicked out might have actually been a solid opportunity when he spots a food stall and asks the lady running it for a recommendation. She suggests he try the boar cow loin, so he tells her that sounds perfect and drops some coins in her hand. She thanks him for stopping by and he takes a bite, totally blown away by how good the food tastes. The vendor mentions she hasn't seen him around and asks where he's from, so he tells her he just arrived from Lighton. He explains he was part of the blacksmith guild there, but then awkwardly admits he actually got banished. A loud voice cuts through the market noise, someone's yelling for attention and asking how much people think a specific falchion cost, making an angry adventurer show off her broken blade. She screams that the thing couldn't even handle a tree branch before snapping right in half. The guy she's yelling at just looks annoyed, telling her she's probably just using her gear the wrong way. People in the crowd start wondering what's going on. Turns out it's a traveling weapon merchant who only shows up every once in a while. The food vendor tells Darrett that the guy usually has a decent selection, but his reputation is actually pretty trash. Darrett looks over with a sour face, saying that shady guys like that are all over the place. He finishes his food and tells the lady he's gonna go check it out. She tells him to be careful as he heads off. Darrett pushes through the crowd as the adventurer keeps shouting. She reminds the merchant he promised a steel or sword would wreck plant monsters. The merchant acts offended and asks if she's really accusing him of selling fake weapons, while he gets this creepy look on his face and dares her to show him some actual proof. The adventurer is still fuming, but her kid tries to pull her back, telling her she should just drop it, but she isn't listening. Holding up the broken blade that has a weirdly bumpy texture inside the metal where it snapped, then Darrett speaks up from the crowd, repeating the merchant's claim about it being steel ore and asking if that's right. So he steps forward and tells the guy to hold on, saying that lying really isn't going to do him any favors. Both the merchant and the adventurer just stare at him. They're totally surprised that some random guy is getting involved. Darrett lets them know he's a blacksmith too, then points right at the broken falchion and drops the truth. He tells the guy he didn't use steel ore at all, but actually used cassiterite to make the sword. The merchant starts sweating and yelling, claiming he didn't use anything like that and telling Darrett to quit lying. But Darrett just takes the broken piece from the lady and says he's got all the proof he needs right here, while he shows everyone the pitted pattern in the metal, a dead giveaway that the merchant used cheap cassiterite. Darrett points out the wavy ripples on the blade as the biggest giveaway, explaining that if it were actually real steel, those lines would be perfectly straight. The crowd starts buzzing, with people realizing their own blacksmiths mention the same thing, and someone even shouts about going to go find the soldiers. The merchant tries to brush him off, But Darrett steps in closer and asks the guy if he's ever even thought about the people who actually have to use these tools in the field. He looks the guy dead in the eye with a cold stare, telling him straight up that, for a fellow blacksmith, he's absolutely pathetic. Darrett keeps the pressure on, telling the guy he needs to do better and finally start taking some actual responsibility for the work he puts out. The merchant starts shaking and tells Darrett to shut up. He's clearly losing it because he can't handle an old man lecturing him in front of everyone. He keeps muttering about being talked down to like that, and then he reaches out and grabs the hilt of a sword. Suddenly the guy just snaps and charges forward with the blade, screaming at Darrett to stop giving him a lecture as he swings. Everything turns into a mess as Darrett realizes how bad this is getting. He shouts for everyone to get back before anyone gets hurt. Just as the merchant is about to connect, someone yells for him to stop it while moving in to block the attack. The merchant lunges forward with the sword, but a girl suddenly steps in to stop him. She looks totally calm despite the blade being right there. Before the guy can even react, she slams him into the ground with one hand, leaving Darrett standing there completely shocked by how fast everything just happened. The woman with the braids and the other people nearby just stare in awe while the girl looks down at the guy on the floor with a really sharp, serious stare. She tells the soldiers to take the guy away, and they salute her immediately as the rest of the crowd starts cheering because the merchant finally got caught. Turns out she's actually the commander of the Grossa army, and Darrett can't help but be impressed as he thanks her for the help, though she just says it was all part of the job. The girl stops and looks closer at him. Something about his face seems really familiar as she starts to ask if he's who she thinks he is, while Darrett just stands there feeling awkward and wondering what's up. He starts panicking internally, realizing that being an unemployed guy talking to a high-ranking official might look bad. He's worried he'll get arrested for being a creep, but then she asks if he's the teacher she used to know. The commander gives him a big smile and introduces herself as Milital, asking if he still remembers her from back then. She brings up a memory from 10 years ago when he was the one who made a toy sword for her to play with. Darrett's eyes go wide as the realization finally hits him. He can't believe how much she's grown since she was a kid, and she's just as happy to see her old master again. Milital assumes he came to the city because of the letter she sent him, but her soldiers are just confused about who he is. She explains to her squad that this is the man who basically looked after her when she was growing up. Milital decides she's going to stick around to talk for a while. She tells her squad to head out without her, and the soldiers salute, saying they understand the order. Darrett is still processing things and asks if she's really a Legion commander in the Grossa army. She tells him yeah, and it's all thanks to him. He thinks that's a massive promotion for someone her age, but she just shakes her head and says it isn't like that. She looks down at her weapon and says everything she's achieved is actually because of this specific sword. The guys in the back are confused about what a sword has to do with it, but Darrett asks her to draw it so he can see. And as she pulls the blade from its sheath, Darrett looks on with a really serious expression. He stares at the pitch-black metal, realizing this is the Shinma, a rank S divine magic sword with a holy attribute. He starts losing it because a rank S weapon is basically a national treasure, but then Milital tells him that he was the one who made it. Darrett is totally spaced out now. He doesn't have a single memory of ever forging a sword that looks like this. Darrett is moping because he thinks he just got his fingerprints all over a national treasure. But Milital looks over and says she should probably rephrase things. She explains that the toy sword he made her back then actually evolved into the weapon she has now. Darrett's jaw drops as he hears the news, totally losing it because the whole idea sounds impossible. He shouts that he's never heard of a weapon ever doing something like that, and Milital admits she hasn't either, but she tells him that as they spent time together, the blade slowly changed its form until it became the sword it is today. She looks at him and suggests that maybe the weapons he creates have some kind of special power that lets them evolve. Darrett stares at the hilt, finally realizing this legendary S-rank blade really is just that old toy from 10 years ago. She confirms it really was just a kid's toy at first, leaving Darrett standing there unable to believe what he's hearing. It seems like the weapon changed because of how much she cared about it and how her own feelings grew over time. Darrett is still confused, so Milital tells him she actually has a theory about why his weapons are so different. Milital looks back at the time in Lighton and mentions how the tools Darrett made weren't really appreciated. She wonders if anyone back then actually took the time to care for the things he created, considering how the city was full of rich adventurers who could afford to just buy new stuff whenever they wanted. She says Lighton really just had a culture where people tossed things out like they were nothing, and Darrett looks down, admitting that as a blacksmith, that kind of mindset was always something he had a really hard time accepting. He starts to realize he was tossing things aside way before the owners could even develop a real bond with their gear. Milital nods and says that's exactly right, and since he's thinking about it, she looks him right in the eyes, calling him her teacher, and says she has a huge favor to ask of him. She mentions a specific point he brought up in his letter, which catches him off guard. Derek asks what she's getting at, and he wonders if this favor has something to do with her work with the Grossa army, but he's not ready for how intense she's about to get as she leans in close. She suddenly grabs him and begs him to become her personal, exclusive blacksmith. Derek just stands there with his head spinning, completely shocked by the offer. Derek panics and shuts the idea down immediately, saying there's no way he's doing that. He tells her it's just way too much responsibility for one guy, but Milital won't take no for an answer, bowing her head and begging him to please help them out, telling him he's literally the only person they can ask for a favor like this. Derek is shaking his head, trying to figure out why it has to be him, and Milital looks a bit awkward as she explains there's a situation they're stuck in. Derek repeats it back, sounding totally stressed out by the sound of that, but the adventurer with the braids walks up and interrupts them. She apologizes for jumping into their conversation, just to thank Derek for saving her earlier. He looks a bit surprised, while Milital stands in the back looking totally annoyed by the distraction, and even the shady merchant joins in, saluting Milital and thanking her for everything she did as the commander. And Milital tries to keep it professional, mentioning it's been a while since the last ceremony and saying she's just glad they aren't hurt. But then she suddenly grabs Derek's arm, saying she's in a huge rush. Derek doesn't even have time to react before she starts hauling him off, leaving him yelling and asking where they're even going. The adventurer with the braids yells out that she wants to give Derek a reward for earlier, telling them to come stay at the inn in the East District. Derek is actually pretty happy about the offer since free lodging helps a lot. But as he tries to say he'll go, Milital warns him to shut up or he'll bite his tongue while she's hauling him, and she just keeps dragging him through the city streets like a sack of potatoes, leaving Derek groaning as they disappear into the distance. Meanwhile, back in the City of Light at the Blacksmith Guild, the guild leader, Sinyan, is busy staring at himself in his vanity mirror, talking about how great he looks striking a pose, and calling himself beautiful while he admires his own reflection with a huge, smug grin. He eventually walks out to the main hall to greet his staff, making a comment about how the air feels way fresher now that Derek is finally gone, and the employees all greet him back before he calls for the morning meeting to start, wanting to kick things off by reciting the guild's philosophy. But he gets cut off immediately when someone calls out from the entrance, making him turn around to see who's interrupting him. Sinyan asks who the hell these people are as a bunch of high-ranking soldiers, and an official march right into the building. Back at the guild, a fancy-looking kid shows up and asks Sinyan if Lord Durate is around, which immediately makes Sinyan's face twist up in total anger since he can't stand anyone treating Derek like a big deal. Later on, the kid, Nanahikari, finds Derek and greets him pretty disrespectfully by calling him an old man. Derek notes that 5 days have passed, and Nanahikari just smirks, saying he'll give him credit for actually showing up instead of running away. A crowd starts to gather around the area, everyone whispering and acting all nervous about the huge scene breaking out. Derek looks a bit stressed out and starts sweating, but Milital stands right by his side with a serious look on her face. The time finally comes for the official blacksmithing duel to go down, and everyone is hyped up for it. An announcer yells out to the whole crowd that the match between Lord Nanahikari and Lord Durate is about to kick off, and Nanahikari and his maids start walking out toward the center of the arena while the crowd watches them. The signal is given to let the blacksmithing contest begin, leaving Derek and Milital watching from the sidelines as the pressure hits a high point. Derek and Milital stand together as things get real. He's looking pretty stressed about the whole situation. People in the crowd start freaking out because the big guy shows up. It's Detroit, some legendary destroyer. Everyone is staring at the sword the kid is holding. It's putting off this crazy energy that no one understands. Milital yells about how they're playing dirty, and Derek can't even argue because he knows she's right. Nanahikari just smirks from the side, saying that flashy sword is all show and won't actually do anything. The rules are laid out. You lose if your sword breaks or you step out, which just makes Milital even more annoyed. Detroit looks down at his opponent and laughs. He can't believe he's actually supposed to fight a little girl. The kid doesn't say a word, she just grips the sword tight as that weird energy keeps building up. The official steps up to the center of the ring and raises his hand to get everyone's attention. He gives the signal to start, and Detroit immediately steps in to crush the kid before she can even move. Detroit lets out a grunt as he starts his first move, putting all his weight into a heavy swing. The massive blade tears through the air, but Comfy manages to hop back just in time to avoid getting crushed. She braces herself as the pressure from the attack nearly blows her off her feet. People in the crowd start losing it, yelling about the insane power and how they can feel the wind from the swing. Detroit keeps the pressure on, telling her to take this as he lets out another huge horizontal slash. But he's getting annoyed that he hasn't hit her yet, so he mocks her and asks if she can do anything besides run away. He lets out a loud shout and swings again, forcing Comfy to flip through the air just to stay in one piece. She grunts as she lands hard near the boundary, looking pretty small compared to the giant standing over her. The crowd is screaming as Detroit starts laughing. He's got her cornered now and tells her there's nowhere left to hide. Everyone watching is terrified, and one guy says he definitely doesn't want to see the kid get turned into a mess. Detroit looms over her, offering to let her off easy if she just quits now. But Comfy isn't having it and says there's no way she's surrendering. His voice goes cold as he tells her she asked for it, and he looks absolutely livid, telling her not to dare regret what's about to happen. While he grips his sword, Comfy stands her ground, looking a bit nervous but keeping her eyes locked on him. In the stands, Milital thinks about the commander who trained them, while Darrett starts cheering at the top of his lungs for her, and the sword he made Detroit puts everything into one massive overhead strike, yelling for her blade to just break already, but Comfy yells back that she'll never lose as her sword starts surging with crazy electrical energy. Suddenly, a massive explosion of lightning erupts from their clash, filling the entire arena with blinding light. The power is so intense that the bolts of energy shoot straight up into the sky, and everyone watching Darrett, Milital, and even Nana Hikari can only stare in total shock at the insane power coming from the kid. The broken blade slams into the stone floor and stays standing. The people in the stands can't even find the words to describe what they just saw. They all stand there sweating, just staring as someone asks how the destroyer's sword got cut without making a single sound, while another guy can't believe how sharp that blade was. Watching the reaction, Darrett starts feeling a bit awkward. He wonders if he overdid it with the adjustments he made. But the announcer snaps everyone back to reality by yelling that Comfrey is the winner. The crowd goes wild as the kid runs across the arena, leaving Milital to tell Darrett that he actually pulled it off. He just looks on with a calm smile, and then the commander gives Comfrey a huge shout-out for the win. While they're celebrating, Detroit stumbles away from the fight looking like a shell of himself. He's completely out of it, and Nana Hikari is still standing there with his eyes totally blank, unable to process that his champion just got wrecked by a little girl. Darrett walks over to him and reminds the noble about their promise, telling him he needs to start taking his job as a blacksmith seriously from now on. Lord Nana Hikari loses his cool and screams at Darrett to shut up and stop acting like they're friends, but Darrett just stands there with a casual smile, totally unbothered by the tantrum. The noble keeps going, shouting that he's done with his military blacksmith job and threatening to sue every single person in the room. His maid just stands behind him, giving him a look that shows she's reached her limit. Without a word, she winds up and clocks him with a massive slap that sends his head spinning. Comfy, Darrett, and Milital can only stand there with their mouths hanging open, completely shocked by what they just saw, while the maid bows politely, asking them to forgive her master's rudeness and promising to give him a real talking to later. The group stays silent as they watch her lead the dizzy noble and his fighter away from the arena, leaving Nana Hikari to scream from inside the building about how he's never going to forgive that piece of shit Darrett. He tries to get his head back in the game and tells Detroit they're going to launch a sneak attack to get revenge, but the destroyer just looks at him with empty eyes and says he's retiring. He can't get over the fact that he lost to a little girl. Darrett walks down the long hallway alone, thinking about how he's finally going to live a quiet life and saying goodbye to all the drama. But back in the arena, Nana Hikari is absolutely losing it, screaming at the top of his lungs about what a useless piece of trash Darrett is. He turns his anger toward his own maid, pointing a finger and shouting that he's done with her being so violent, yelling about how she'd even dare to hit her own master. But she just gives him a cold farewell and heads for the door. With a totally blank look, she tells him she's taking full responsibility for hitting him and is quitting on the spot, which Nana Hikari just scoffs at, crossing his arms and telling her to go right ahead and leave if she wants. As she walks away, she casually mentions how he used S-rank materials without any permission, even mockingly calling him a lady while she's at it. She doesn't stop there, bringing up the fact that he let a total brute like the Destroyer live in the family mansion, leaving Nana Hikari completely frozen in shock when she reveals she's already reported everything he did to his parents. He snaps out of it and chases after her, screaming that she's a traitor and telling her to stop calling him names as she walks out on him for good. Suddenly, a voice booms across the room, shouting Nana Hikari's name so loud it practically shakes the walls, and Nana Hikari's eyes go wide as he realizes he's in deep trouble, looking totally panicked as he sees his parents standing there. He calls out to his father and mother, but they're both giving off a terrifying vibe, and then his dad starts losing it, yelling at him about how he could be so stupid to use materials meant for another country without asking. His mother joins in, looking just as heated as she asks if he's actually trying to destroy their family's reputation for good. The father asks how many times he has to pull this kind of stunt. Nana Hikari tries to explain himself, but his dad just says he's done. Right then and there, his father drops the news that he's officially exiled, leaving Nana Hikari standing there in total disbelief. but his dad isn't finished. He gestures to the guards and orders them to drag Nana Hikari away to the forest of Taman immediately. Nana Hikari starts to lose it as the guards grab him, begging them to stop and saying he'll do anything but go to that forest, screaming out for his father and mother one last time, but they just walk away and leave him to his fate. It's late at night in the Taman forest, a pretty creepy place where Nana Hikari is currently losing his mind. He hears all these scary noises in the dark and lets out a scream as he starts swinging his arms around like a maniac. He's yelling for whatever's out there to get away, totally terrified of the fact that he actually got exiled to a place crawling with monsters. He looks totally broken, thinking about how Derek was the one who actually created that Shinma weapon. It's eating him alive, and he realizes he was just jealous of the guy's talent, falling to his knees as he regrets ever bringing up that blacksmithing contest in the first place. If he could just go back, he knows he should have just been honest from the start. But while he's rotting out in the woods, things are looking up back in the city where everyone is gathered outside after the big match. Milital speaks up and addresses the kid, telling Konfi that during this blacksmithing match he fought like a total pro and did the Grossa army proud. Konfi salutes and thanks the commander, but she tells them both that this win belongs to the two of them. Derek just plays it cool though, saying he only forged the sword. Derek just keeps it humble, telling everyone that the one who actually put in the most work was Konfi. Konfi gets totally flustered hearing her name called out like that. She's blushing like crazy while she suddenly yells out an excuse and starts sprinting away. She's got one thing on her mind, getting to that victory meet. The other soldiers swarm her to say congrats, and they're all pretty hyped since Milital mentions they really stumbled onto something great today. Derek just smiles, saying he's looking forward to what her future holds, and the two of them stand there for a second, just watching the soldiers celebrate together. The guys are all hanging out and passing around food, making sure Konfi gets her share for the win. But then Milital steps up to the front and gets serious, shouting for everyone to listen up because she's got a huge announcement to make. She calls out to the crowd, telling them that as of today, Lord Derek is officially appointed as the Grossa Army's new exclusive blacksmith. Everyone loses it, cheering for the old man who just saved their gear. Derek just stands there with a polite smile, even though he's secretly thinking about how much he hates being called an old man by the soldiers. The scene shifts over to the massive royal palace of the Glossa Kingdom. It's this huge white building with towers reaching up into the clouds. Inside the palace walls, Senji is walking alone down a quiet stone hallway lit by torches. His footsteps are the only thing making noise until he hears a voice yelling from further down the corridor, demanding that someone bring something out immediately. It turns out Sinyan is the one making all that noise. He's stuck behind bars, screaming about how they can't treat him like this and that they won't get away with it. He keeps calling the guards garbage for not negotiating, which just makes one guard wonder what his deal is while the other tells him to pipe down. Senji finally reaches the cell and just rubs his head, letting out a tired sigh at all the screaming going on. The guards immediately salute and greet him as Lord Senji. He just tells them they're doing a good job as he approaches the lock. He reaches out his hand toward the door, and a glowing magic seal pops up right in front of the bars. The lock clicks open and Senji tells Sinyan to come out. The disgraced guild leader just stares at the kid, looking completely stunned. The work never seems to end. There's already a massive line of soldiers stretching out the door and around the corner. One kid is totally hyped, thanking Derate because his sword feels way easier to use after the repairs. Suddenly everyone is mobbing him. One kid wants his sword fixed while another is begging him to handle his shoulder guard next, making Derate look completely exhausted. He tells everyone to just wait a bit since he has to do them in order. He's officially the exclusive blacksmith for the Grossa army now. He just sits there scratching his head, looking at the huge crowd of people waiting for him to get back to work at the forge. Further down the hall, a group of kids is staring at a display case. They can't get over how cool and beautiful the sword inside looks. One boy says he's definitely going to be a Kamina user one day, but his friend just talks back, saying he'll get there first, which leads to Comfy stepping forward with a determined look. She tells them she isn't planning on losing to them either. She's got this big smile on her face as she promises to train even harder to become a wielder who's actually worthy of Kamina. While they're talking, one of the kids notices a plaque on the wall and asks what that S-rank achievement is all about. The kids standing nearby are gossiping, saying Derate must be as strong as the commander, if not strong enough to take down one of the 4 heavenly kings. Derate nearly drops his tools when he hears the news. He can't believe Milital actually took down a demon. One of the kids tells him the Legion commander is totally amazing, and Derate just thinks about how much of a name she's made for herself, making him feel pretty good about things. He looks at his hammer and thinks it's a great feeling seeing the weapons he forged being put to such good use. The kids keep the praise coming, saying he's incredible for building a sword like Kamina. One boy even says he wants to be a cool old guy like him. Derate's face drops a little as he realizes they're still calling him an old guy, But he doesn't let it get to him for long. He starts packing things up and tells the group of kids that he's officially closing up shop for the day, so he shouts out to the huge crowd of soldiers to come back tomorrow. The place is packed as everyone finally starts heading out. Milital shows up right then with a big smile, telling her master he did a good job today and noting how busy he's been. Durate says it's even more booming here than it was in Lighton, and it actually makes him feel fulfilled. Milital just giggles, happy that things are working out. Milital looks out at the grounds and tells Darrett that the soldiers have totally changed thanks to him. And she explains that everyone is so hyped to use the Kamina gear that they've been training like completely different people lately. Darrett smiles, saying that's the biggest honor a blacksmith could ever ask for. But Milital's tone shifts as she says there's a catch. She bows her head and apologizes for the official decree that came from the queen, leaving Darrett looking a bit confused until he remembers the order was just to keep his crazy high-end crafting and repairs at a moderate level, which she confirms is the case. Darrett tells her not to sweat it since he doesn't mind. He knows the whole military would probably fall apart if everyone had weapons that powerful. Milital gives him a huge, relieved smile, clearly happy that he's taking the news so well. But then she mentions she actually has something way more important to talk about today, making Darrett ask what's going on. She tells him the queen wants to see him personally and he needs to get to the palace immediately, which leaves Darrett standing there in total shock, sweating as he tries to process what's happening. Darrett's head is spinning as he asks if she really means he has to go right this second, and Milital just gives him a quick nod. He completely loses it, yelling out and asking why something like this is even happening to him. Milital tries to calm him down, explaining that the summons is actually a reward for all the crazy hard work he's put in over the last few weeks. And she points out that boosting the entire army's morale and keeping the national forces from getting weaker is a huge deal that the higher-ups noticed. Darrett just stands there frozen like a statue, panicking over the idea of a regular guy like him meeting the queen while Milital wonders if he's still with her. His eyes start reeling as he nervously asks what kind of person Queen Serenade actually is, hoping for some good news, but Milital takes a second to think about it before telling him that to put it as simply as possible, the queen is the type of ruler who has absolutely zero patience for anyone she thinks is incompetent or useless. She sits on her throne with a look that could freeze water. Down in the main hall, a couple of guys are on their knees shaking while the queen demands to know exactly who broke the legendary sword. The legendary sword is a total wreck, just sitting there in pieces inside its fancy display case. Sinon is busy staring at the queen with heart eyes like a total creep, while she admits she actually fell for his smooth talking and blames herself for being blind to just how useless he really was. She paces back and forth, fuming over the fact that she let things get this far. She turns her attention over to Senji, telling him straight up that he was completely incompetent this time, and Senji just takes it on the chin. He closes his eyes and tells her he's ready for whatever consequences she's got for him. The queen doesn't hold back, screaming that she hates losers while she starts lashing him with a whip. Senji lets out a huge yell as the strikes keep coming. Instead of begging for mercy, he actually tells her to put more spirit into it, leaving Sinon standing there wondering what's even happening. Senji ends up face down on the floor, twitching with this weird, happy look on his face, but the queen isn't finished yet. She stands over Sinon with the whip ready and tells him he's the next one up. She calls him a complete moron, yelling that she's never heard of a guild master being dumb enough to break a national treasure, and Sinon starts screaming as she lets him have it. The queen keeps lashing Sinon, yelling at him to think about how useless he's been. Sinon is curled up on the floor crying for her to stop, while Senji just lies there looking weirdly happy. But the queen isn't done, telling Sinon he's officially fired from being guild master. Sinon just stares at her in shock, barely able to make a sound as his scream for an explanation echoes all the way out of the castle windows and into the sky. Things finally quiet down outside the palace walls for a moment, leading into Darrett looking like he's about to lose it as Milital leads him through the halls. She spots the room and tells him they've finally arrived, but standing in front of those huge doors, Milital stops and asks if he's actually ready to go inside. Darrett is sweating like crazy, admitting he probably needs another year just to get his head right for this meeting. His heart is pounding so loud he can hear it, and Milital just tells him he has to be joking about waiting that long. She tells him he's going to be just fine as the guards grab the door handles, reminding him that the queen is actually pretty nice to people who are good at their jobs as the massive doors start to open. The queen looks down from her throne, telling both of them to stand up and look her in the eye, so they both give a quick shout of respect before Milital officially tells the queen she's brought Darrett along. Darrett is sweating bullets as he stammers out his own name, trying to keep it together while the queen gives him a small smile, telling him the weapons he's been making are actually incredible. She reaches a hand out and says she's giving him her full recognition, straight up telling him that he's the best blacksmith in the entire country. Derek puts a hand over his heart and bows his head, telling her he's beyond honored to hear that. He just stands there for a moment looking totally relieved. But then the Queen actually apologizes for all the trouble the Seven Stars Guild caused him, saying she feels bad for not noticing his talent sooner. She keeps going on about how her eyes were clouded, so Derek has to step in and tell her she really shouldn't say stuff like that about herself. Derek tries his best to play it cool, nervously telling the Queen her eyes are as clear as pure jewels, while Milital just watches him struggle. The Queen laughs a bit at the weak compliment, telling him that even though he's a master smith, he's pretty terrible at talking to women. Derek just stands there with a tired, awkward smile, letting out a forced laugh since he knows she's totally right. So the Queen moves things along, saying the reason she called him here is actually pretty simple as a guard wheels in a long table. She explains that they need to talk about some damage dealt to a national treasure known as the Amatsurugi. Derek looks completely confused, just repeating the name like he has no idea what she's talking about. So the guard pulls the sheet off the table as the Queen tells him there's no way he could have forgotten about it. She confirms the blade in the case is the Amatsurugi, and Milital asks for a moment so they can both lean in and get a better look at it. Derek stares at the reflection in the glass, thinking to himself that he's never seen a sword this beautiful in his entire life. But then the Queen mentions how it was a huge scandal, because some noble was so obsessed with the sword that it actually ended up evolving. The Queen explains how the previous owner totally lost it over the sword's power, which is why they hurried to hand it over to the kingdom. Derek stares at the S-rank blade, thinking it's crazy that it evolved again and feeling like he's still a rookie for not even remembering making it. He starts to sweat, suddenly remembering that the Queen is famous for having zero patience for people who don't know what they're doing. He tries to find the right words to say, but his mind is just racing in circles. Finally, he just comes clean and tells her he's really sorry, but he honestly has no memory of ever working on this sword. Instead of getting mad, the Queen thinks it's incredible, shouting about how he made a legendary blade without even realizing how big of a deal it was. She just bursts out laughing, telling him he's a seriously fascinating guy. Derek feels a huge wave of relief that he isn't in trouble, even though he's still thinking he doesn't know any sword-crazy nobles. The Queen gets back to business and tells him she brought him there because she needs him to repair the Amatsurugi. Derek looks at her completely stunned, just repeating the word repair like he can't believe what he's hearing. Derek looks down at the snapped blade, thinking about how even with everything the Queen said, the sword is still just a piece of broken metal and Queen's serenade isn't done yet, opening the doors to the room while telling them she has something else to show them. Suddenly, Signon comes flying into the room and faceplants hard right in front of everyone, letting out a loud yell as he hits the floor. Derek and Milital are both caught off guard, with Milital recognizing the guy immediately as she shouts out Signon's name. He just stays there on the ground, looking completely pathetic and sweating buckets after getting tossed in like trash. And the Queen's expression turns cold as she explains that this guy is a liar who claimed he could fix a national treasure, but ended up wrecking it instead. She looks at Derek and asks if he'd be willing to take the disgraced former guild leader on as his personal apprentice. The idea of working under the guy he kicked out makes Signon's face twist with absolute rage and disbelief. He scrambles up and begs the Queen to wait, telling her she can't let someone as incompetent as Derek take charge of anything. Queen Serenade doesn't want to hear it and just shuts him down instantly, telling him straight to his face that he's the only incompetent one in the room. The Queen snaps at Signon to fix his attitude and the way he talks, and he just screams out in pain as she handles him. Derek watches the whole thing go down, completely weirded out by how intense she is and thinking about how scary she can be. The Queen lets Derek know she's assigning a subordinate to watch over him, and right then Senji steps up to introduce himself. Senji gives a big friendly smile and tells Derek not to worry because he's going to make sure no trouble comes his way. Derek just stands there with his arms crossed, sweating a bit because he knows he can't exactly turn down a direct order from the Queen, so he just goes along with it, putting a hand on his chest and telling them that if that's the deal then he's in. The Queen tells him she's looking forward to seeing what he does next, and with that, the massive doors to the throne room start to swing shut. Everyone stands together in the hallway as the doors finally close with a loud thud, leaving the group alone. Derek lets out a long, heavy breath, finally letting the tension go now that the meeting is over, and he stretches his arms high up in the air, admitting to the group that the whole experience was way more nerve-wracking than he expected. Derek rubs the back of his neck, feeling the weight of the day. He tells everyone he's just going to head back to his inn for now. Senji asks him which inn he's staying at, and Derek mentions it's a spot over in the East District. Senji offers to have the National Army set him up with a place to stay instead, but Derek quickly tells him not to worry about it. He smiles, letting them know the place he's currently at is actually a really nice spot. Since he's heading out, Senji decides he'll walk with him for a bit of the way back. The sun goes down as they make their way through the city, eventually reaching the East District where Derek stops in front of a big wooden building and lets the group know they've arrived at the inn. He pushes the door open and calls out to let Teru know he's finally back, which gets a surprised reaction from inside. Teru comes over with a big smile to welcome him home, admitting she was starting to get worried since he stayed out so late. But then Milital steps in looking absolutely furious, announcing she's moving in today too, leaving Teru totally confused. Milital stands there looking totally confident with her hands on her sword. She gives off a pretty scary vibe while announcing that she's moving into the inn starting today. Senji is caught off guard by the news, and while Derek tries to find his words, Teru nervously promises to get a room ready for her immediately. Teru turns her attention back to Derek and calls out to him, and she asks if he wants to start with a bath or dinner, so he decides they should eat first since Milital is joining them. Milital looks annoyed while Sinyan stands nearby, clearly reaching his breaking point. He barges into the room and starts yelling about why Derek is always the one getting all the attention. Sinyan doesn't stop there, loudly demanding that he gets to stay at the inn too, which leads to Senji literally kicking him out of the room, asking him if he actually thought he'd be allowed to stay in a decent spot. Teru looks pretty bad about it, but explains the inn is totally full because of Milital's party, leaving only the stable in the back for anyone else. Sinyan is absolutely losing his mind over the idea of sleeping in a stable, but Senji just grabs him and starts dragging him away, telling him he should be happy with what he's got as they head out the door. Sinyan keeps screaming about being the guild master until Senji shuts him down, reminding the guy he's nothing but an ex-boss now. Teru asks everyone to hang tight for a second while Derek leans back, looking totally exhausted from the drama, and that's when Milital suddenly calls him teacher. Derek looks over at her, sounding pretty confused. Milital asks him if he's got anything going on tomorrow night, and when he tells her his schedule is wide open, she gets this huge, blushing smile on her face and excitedly suggests that the two of them should just hang out alone tonight instead. The next morning arrives at a large stone building, where a group of people is waiting to meet Derek, and one guy steps forward to shake his hand, saying he's heard a ton of great things about him. The man admits he was actually pretty stressed about the future after that spoiled brat kicked them all out of the guild. So he tells Milital how great it feels to be back and mentions it's been a long time since he's seen the commander. Derek looks pretty wiped out while the girls watch him from behind, and he can't help but think about how much better things are now compared to Senji looks over at a miserable, shaking Sinyan and mentions he's shocked there's actually another person as bad as Nana Hikari out there. He points out that you'd have to be totally insane to break a national treasure, reminding Sinyan that a stunt like that usually gets a person the death penalty. He tells the guy he better be grateful the queen is feeling merciful. But then Senji turns his attention back to Derek and tells him it's finally time to get to work on repairing the Amatsurugi. Milital nods along, saying he's totally right about that, when suddenly one of the blacksmiths calls out to Derek and drops a massive, heavy sack onto the workbench with a loud thud. The man opens it up and tells Derek to use everything inside, revealing a stash of rare stuff like larva rock and aqua stones that has the other smiths completely floored. Standing there with his arms crossed, the guy explains that he's been keeping these high-grade materials hidden for a long time just to make sure Nana Hikari never got to use them. He tells Derek that these materials are going to be a lot happier in the hands of a real craftsman like him, especially since they're going to be used to rebuild a legendary blade. The smith smiles, mentioning how they're finally going to become a part of the Amatsurugi, looking down at the broken sword, and saying there's honestly no bigger honor for a blacksmith than what they're about to do. The guys look over the stash, and one of the smiths mentions how crazy high quality these materials are while Derek looks up at the workshop and promises to put everything to good use. But before he can start, the lead blacksmith asks if he can stick around to watch him work, and the girls immediately jump in shouting that they want to see it too. Derek tells them it's fine and that they're more than welcome to stay. He turns his focus back to the blade, thinking about how beautiful the sword looks the longer he stares at it. He stands over the workbench in total silence, thinking to himself that his past self was actually pretty incredible. A cold sweat breaks out on his face as he realizes the level of skill it's going to take. He starts to wonder if he even has what it takes to surpass the man he used to be, all while the other smiths stand back, looking totally excited to see him finally get to work, and Senji watches with a calm smile, leaving Sinyan in the back looking completely miserable and bitter. Milital watches with stars in her eyes, looking completely hyped for what's about to happen while Derek pulls his glove tight and tells himself that he's definitely going to surpass his past work. The workshop immediately fills with the heavy sound of metal hitting metal as he gets down to business. And before long, someone yells out in shock as the newly refined Amatsurugi sits there glowing. The other smiths can't believe he fixed it that fast, saying it's exactly what they expected from the best blacksmith of their time. They crowd around him, asking how he even applied a holy attribute to the blade. They start grilling him on his technique and begging for lessons, leaving Derek feeling pretty overwhelmed. Milital jokes about how popular he's getting, but he just says he's proud of the weapon and tells her she's definitely exaggerating. He tries to play it cool, but then he notices something creepy in the back. Sinyan is standing there fuming, looking like he's about to lose his mind. Milital tells Sinyan it's time to get to work and suggests he starts by trying to swing the hammer. But Sinyan immediately loses it, screaming at her to stop giving him orders like she's his boss. Milital doesn't take that well and kicks him hard, telling him to stop acting so high and mighty. And then she just keeps stomping on him while he's down on the floor as Derek watches. Once he's back up, the other smith tells him to try flattening a metal plate, and Derek warns him to watch his fingers. Sinyan just clicks his tongue and grabs the hammer anyway. The other blacksmiths stand back and whisper to each other, looking pretty worried about how this is going to go. Sinyan ignores them and raises the hammer high to take a big swing, but as the hammer comes down, everyone watching realizes something went wrong, and the next thing they know, Sinyan is rolling around on the floor in total agony. The blacksmith nearby rushes over and asks Sinyan if he's actually okay, but Sinyan is just losing his mind, screaming at the guy to stay away because he doesn't want any pity from him. Things get even more chaotic when another smith yells that it's dangerous, making Sinyan freak out even more. While in the back, the other workers are just whispering about the mess, and Derek looks completely done with everything, especially when Sinyan keeps going on about how nobody should be looking down on him. One of the guys just sighs and rubs his head. He can already tell there's a ton of trouble ahead, so later on, the group heads over to a local tavern to grab some drinks, and they all sit down to celebrate the big news about the new appointment as Lord Delet's exclusive blacksmith. The whole group raises their mugs and yells cheers to the new job. But then Teru just stares them down with a super serious look and asks what happened after that. Teru looks around the table and asks why she and Comfy were even brought along to this thing, while Comfy just checks to see if the whole crew finally showed up. Derek lets them know he invited everyone himself, pointing out that the rest of the smiths and soldiers are hanging out too, but Milital is already sitting there looking completely wasted and cranky. Milital starts chugging her drink like there's no tomorrow, which makes Comfy totally lose it as she screams at the commander to not take more than a single bite of food. Someone slams their mug against the wood with a loud thud and demands to know exactly what was meant by that comment. And the conversation shifts to the booze as they show off these weird, Delet dolls that come in different versions based on age, almost like little mascots for the night. Comfy just gives a tired smile and sighs that she was way too late to stop the chaos from starting, especially when someone else yells that the main event is finally happening. Milital grabs one of the tiny dolls and says they're doing this for real, leaving Derek standing there looking like he has absolutely no clue why she's playing with toys. One of the soldiers leans over and mentions there's actually an extra doll in the mix now, and the guy next to him just laughs and agrees that he's right. A woman nearby watches the whole thing go down and tells them they really went overboard making all these things again, but Comfy just tells everyone to leave her alone, explaining that once the commander gets into this zone, she won't snap out of it until she eventually falls asleep. Milital keeps chugging her drink like a beast, and Teru just watches, feeling like her image of the dignified commander is totally ruined since she can't even wrap her head around the scene. The angry adventurer chimes in from across the table, mentioning she heard all about the big blacksmithing contest from Comfy. She tells Derek she heard he made a legendary weapon for the kid and thanks him for everything, all while Senji sits there quietly eating. Derek acts all humble about it, telling her he just did what any normal blacksmith should do, but the adventurer isn't having it, telling him he's way too modest because Comfy actually beat a guy known for his crazy brute strength. Derek tries to pass the credit off again, saying the win was really thanks to Milital's training and Comfy having the guts to pull it off. Senji just sits there with a spoon in his mouth, staring blankly as he listens to them go back and forth. He suddenly speaks up and asks Derek if he's ever going to make a weapon for himself, catching the smith right in the middle of a drink. Derek looks at him like he's crazy and asks why he'd need a weapon, laughing that it's not like he's out here being an adventurer. Senji just gives him a big smile and says he thinks it's a great idea, leaving Derek looking completely lost. Milital plays with some small figures while explaining that if Derek actually uses the weapons himself, he'll finally get a real feel for what the person using them goes through. And she jokingly adds that he'd also get to spend more time with a beautiful upperclassman like her. A total win-win. Derek admits she makes a good point, but he trails off. Thinking about the idea of actually having a weapon of his own, the thought of weapons keeps bouncing around in his head as he tries to wrap his mind around becoming a user instead of just a maker. Back in the workshop, Derek picks up a metal block ready to take the plunge. The forge is firing up and the chimney starts working as he gets to business. Later on, Milital stands in front of the ex-guild smiths and announces that she's having Derek craft a weapon for himself. She gives them a big smile and says that having a way to defend yourself is just common sense anyway, while Derek chimes in, telling everyone that learning how to handle the gear is actually going to help him make his forging even more precise than before. The whole group starts cheering, saying they're totally down with the plan and can't wait to see his skills reach the next level. The soldiers get all hyped up, telling Derek that when it comes to actually using the gear, he should just leave it to the pros, and Derek just gives them a big smile, saying thank you for having his back like that. But then, out of nowhere, a massive voice screams for everyone to wait, it's Sinyan, and he's throwing a total fit, yelling that he doesn't agree with the plan and that the whole thing is completely unfair. He keeps ranting, demanding they give him a weapon too and complaining about being left out, while the rest of the guys just stand there looking bored. Suddenly, a hand reaches out and grabs him right by the ear, it's Milital, and she tells him to stop talking trash and get back to his training before tossing him right back to his desk. The entire group lets out a long, tired sigh after watching the usual drama unfold, leaving Derek standing there with a nervous laugh, just trying to play along with the chaos. A little while later, the scene shifts over to the Grossa army warehouse. Derek starts digging through the supplies in the warehouse, grunting as he shifts things around while he picks up a few stones, trying to figure out which material is the best fit for the job. The guy is like a kid in a candy store, pointing out one good piece after another, but Milital just stands there watching him in total silence. She finally speaks up, asking why he isn't grabbing any of the A-rank materials since he's allowed to use whatever he wants. But Derek just keeps looking through the crates and tells her that the low-rank stuff is actually more than enough. He looks at the rocks in his hands and says he'd way rather save the high-quality materials for the soldiers' weapons instead of wasting them on himself, which leaves Milital standing there completely speechless by how selfless he's being. She starts shaking and crying right there in the warehouse, catching Derek totally off guard. She wipes her eyes and tells him that no matter what, he really is a magnificent person. Derek just gives a nervous laugh, telling her she's definitely blowing things out of proportion. Derek stands outside the workshop and says he thinks he's finally ready to get started. The apprentices all gather around him, asking what he's planning to build and guessing everything from axes to magic wands. He just gives them a nervous smile while scratching his neck, admitting he's been putting a lot of thought into it, and then the idea of making a sword gets thrown out there. Milital gets way too excited at the suggestion, telling him she'd be more than happy to teach him how to use one, but Derek immediately shoots it down, looking pretty awkward while Milital just freezes in total shock. He points out that everyone already knows how that would go, imagining himself accidentally stabbing his own leg or dropping the blade on his head. Instead, he tells them he's already picked out the best tool for the job, making Milital wonder what he could possibly be talking about as he reaches down and firmly grabs the handle of his chosen tool. He holds it up with a confident look, simply telling everyone that he's going with a hammer. Milital can't believe her ears and asks if he's actually serious about using a hammer. The rest of the group is just as stunned by the choice, making Derek explain that he feels like he can actually use it. He tells them that at the end of the day, the weapon is basically just a hammer, and it feels just like swinging a mallet to him. He stands there telling the crowd it's no different from the tools they use as blacksmith, so the apprentices start to come around, saying they get it now. They cheer him on, saying this is exactly the kind of outside-the-box thinking they'd expect from him. Smoke starts pouring out of the workshop chimney as the steady sound of metal hitting metal rings through the air, while Derek finally steps out holding a massive, heavy-duty block hammer. He looks pretty proud of himself and tells everyone that it's finally done, leading to the whole crew losing their minds. They all crowd around, shouting about how cool the new weapon looks, and Derek just stares at his work with a grin. He thinks to himself that even for him, this thing is a total masterpiece. But then he realizes there's still one small thing left. He mentions that the hammer still needs a name, and right then Milital jumps in with a huge smile. She looks super excited and tells him she's actually got a brilliant idea for what to call it. The apprentices are all hyped up, shouting that this is exactly what they'd expect from their Legion commander. They're already convinced that whatever name she picks is going to be top tier, and Milital clears her throat to get everyone to quiet down for the big reveal. She takes a second to build the suspense before she throws up a big thumbs up and proudly announces that the weapon will be called the Delete Hammer. She looks super confident and asks the group what they think, but Derek just stands there looking completely lost. He lets out a confused sound while the rest of the crowd just stares back with totally blank expressions, making Derek cringe hard because he thinks the name is honestly pretty lame. But just as he's losing hope, the apprentices suddenly flip and start cheering like crazy. Everyone starts yelling about how cool and simple the name is. They're all gathered around the weapon, talking about how the massive shape actually fits the name perfectly, so Derek tries to stop them, waving his hands and telling them to wait a minute. He's clearly not on board with the name, but Milital and the others have stars in their eyes and are way too excited to listen. Derek just groans to himself, realizing there's no way he's winning this argument now that a little time passes and the hype finally starts to settle down. Everything seems set with the new weapon, and the whole workshop stays loud with the sound of everyone cheering, totally pumped up about the new hammer. Derek figures that since things worked out, he might as well be cool with it. And meanwhile, the workshop stays busy with everyone working away on the delete hammer. It's an S-rank weapon with a holy attribute that converts a person's magic into a hit that feels like a meteor strike. A few weeks pass by, and over at Training Ground 2, things are finally starting to pick up. Derek is out there practicing his swings, putting all his strength into moving that massive hammer through the air. He looks completely locked in, focusing on the weight and the way the weapon moves as the kid watching him mentions how much he's improved lately. Derek just wipes away some sweat and thanks him, looking pretty happy with the progress. Later on, Derek grabs dinner with Milital, but he's low-key panicking about the bill. He can basically see his coins growing wings and flying away. Back at the old guild, Senji shows up with a group of royal guards and asks if Master Durate is around. He explains he's a messenger from the palace looking for the famous blacksmith, which absolutely wrecks Signan's mood. Senji says he's there with a formal request, and Signan just stands there shaking, completely losing it over how successful the guy he kicked out has become. Signan can't believe what he's hearing and starts shaking, asking if they actually have a request for Durate. The shock of it all is hitting him hard. He yells at Senji, asking if they have any business with the great guild master himself, but Senji just shuts him down immediately. Signan starts throwing a massive tantrum in the background, but the messenger and the royal guards don't even care. They just start walking away while the guild master tries to act tough. He stands there with his hands on his vest, telling them Durate is long gone because he kicked that incompetent fool out. Senji completely loses his cool at the news, shouting at the guy and demanding to know what he means by kicking the blacksmith out, but Signan just acts all high and mighty. He closes his eyes and waves a hand, claiming the guy wasted guild resources and didn't show him any respect. He smugly says the blacksmith got exactly what he deserved, which leaves Senji shaking and the guards wondering how their target could really be gone. One of the guards points out how insane this is. The queen herself personally acknowledged a blacksmith this skilled. Yet here Senji is, about to faint from the absolute mess they've walked into. Signan just laughs like an idiot and tells them to rely on him instead, while the guards realize they're in a serious spot. As the guild master keeps cackling to himself, Senji pulls it together and tells his team they need to go find Durate and talk to him first. Senji spots the item and demands to see what's in the box, but Signan tries to pull rank, shouting that he's the guild master and he's way more important than some guy like Derek. He pops the lid anyway, making the guards call him an absolute idiot while Signan gets hit with this blinding light coming from inside the case. He can't even believe his eyes, seeing the angelic treasure sword Amatsurugi. It's a legendary S-rank holy weapon, and it's just sitting there shining. Signan starts shaking as he stares down at the blade, letting out a weak groan because he's never seen anything like it. He says it's beautiful and that it looks just like an angel, totally caught up in the sword's vibe, until Senji mentions he brought it for Derek to repair. Signan loses it, screaming about a national treasure and why Derek has to be the one to touch it. Senji just sighs and drops a massive truth bomb, telling him the reason they need Derek is because he's the one who forged it. Signan completely freezes up when he hears the news. It's like his brain just stopped working right there on the spot. He starts having a full-on meltdown as the realization that he kicked out a legendary smith repeats over and over in his head. Signan completely loses his cool and screams for them not to screw with him. Everyone nearby just freezes in shock, and he keeps yelling about how there's no way a guy like Derek could ever make a sword like that. The guards have to jump in and tell him to get away from Senji, but Signan just stands there seething and grinding his teeth. Senji looks a bit awkward and tries to explain that it isn't just about how it was made, because turns out the Amatsurugi has actually evolved. It's basically changed into something way more powerful than it was before. The room stays tense as the guards continue to hold Signan back, while everyone else just watches the drama unfold. Signan can't even process the idea of a weapon evolving. He just glares and asks Senji if he's trying to make a fool out of him. Senji doesn't blink and tells him it's the truth, mentioning that the queen even gave a direct order to find the sword immediately, which makes Signan start sweating as he repeats the words to himself. The reality of the situation is finally hitting him hard. But then he just snaps, yelling that he can't take this anymore before lunging toward the case to fix the sword himself, and he reaches out and grabs the hilt of the blade like he's actually going to do something. Senji panics and tries to stop him, yelling that Derek is the only one who can actually fix the sword. Signan doesn't care and just dashes forward, and he keeps going while saying that the best blacksmith is the one who gets to be the guild master. With a really creepy look on his face, he keeps repeating to himself that he is the one, he's the real guild master here. Senji just stands there looking completely stunned while someone tells the kid to wait right there, and Sinyan starts screaming at everyone to get out of the room. The locals don't wait around and start running for their lives. Once he's alone, he looks at the sword and sees the blade is chipped. He thinks it's no big deal and that a whetstone will fix it. He sits down at a workbench and admits he hasn't actually sharpened a single sword in his life, but he thinks he can pull it off just from watching his guild members work. He gets the blade onto the stone, telling himself he knows exactly what he's doing because his observation skills are so good. He's totally full of himself, thinking he can master any skill just by seeing it once. But then a massive cracking sound echoes through the whole area. The guards outside jump back as something goes horribly wrong inside. Senji rushes toward the room where the crash happened, yelling for Sinyan because of the loud noise while the guards scramble to see if everyone is okay. Sinyan snaps back from behind the closed door, telling them to shut up and stay quiet because he's still trying to work. So Derek thinks back to his training days when a younger version of himself was giving him pointers, telling him his hammer swings were getting slow and to watch out for opening. The kid keeps the lesson going, explaining how the weapon works differently than a sword since it can double as a shield, so they need to work on defense too. Derek just smiles and says he's got it, following along with the training. This was all the way back when they first started training together, and at the time, Derek was a total mess. His whole body was aching from the workout and he couldn't even move anymore. But he didn't quit, just gripped his hammer and pushed through the pain to keep going until he finally felt like himself again, telling the kid he was all good. The young boy looks relieved and tells him that's awesome, encouraging him to keep up the hard work. The kid keeps talking about the training, mentioning that his hammer technique is actually way better than he thought. Maybe all those years of smithing are finally paying off. And Derek keeps swinging his tool with everything he's got until the kid tells him it's time to take a break. He finds a nice spot under a big tree to sit down and catch his breath for a bit while someone walks up and tells him he did a good job today. Derek looks up to see it's Milital, who's smiling and saying he looks pretty busy with all this smithing and training. Derek tells her he's actually having a great time here, so she mentions how happy the soldiers are to have him around. Out on the field, one of the younger guys yells for Derek to watch his form as they keep practicing, and Derek just stands there with a big smile, looking like he's finally found where he belongs. But someone else is nearby, watching everything with a very sharp look in their eye. Down on Milital's belt, there's a little keychain showing cartoon versions of her, and Derek hanging right there. Derek notices it and laughs, asking if she's really been wearing that thing this whole time. They're both just chilling under a massive tree, and Milital looks over and asks him if he's actually okay with how things are going. Derek looks up at the sky, starting to realize that when he really stops to think about it, his life has been a total blur lately. He thinks about the guild, the traveling, and everyone he's met, realizing it's been a whirlwind of days. He knows that if he hadn't gotten that letter from Milital, there's no telling where he would have ended up or what he'd be doing now. Milital just smiles while looking at the horizon. These really have been some great days in a brand new place for both of them. Derek gets this peaceful look on his face, thinking to himself that he really wishes things could just stay like this forever. But someone starts sprinting toward them, yelling out for a messenger at the top of their lungs and breaking the silence. The peaceful vibe is totally gone as Derek and Milital both snap their heads around to see what the big deal is. A soldier comes running up, shouting to the commander that there's a huge emergency happening. Milital and Derek spin around, and she immediately asks what's going on while the messenger struggles to breathe. The guy finally manages to get his words out, telling them that something is going down in the stone tree forest. Turns out an iron bear has been spotted, and it's a special anomaly, A-rank monster that's way more dangerous than normal. Both Milital and Derek are completely stunned by the news, and they can hardly believe an A-rank showed up. Word spreads fast and people start panicking, yelling about the anomaly being out while everyone scrambles to grab their gear. Milital doesn't waste a second and starts heading toward the trouble with a serious look, while Derek follows close behind. As they're moving through the chaos, Derek looks over at her and asks what a special exception anomaly even means, which makes Milital realize she never actually explained the term to him. She tells him that basically, these monsters are on a whole different level because they're incredibly smart and way more vicious than anything else. Derek admits he's never heard of anything like that before, but it makes sense since they're such a rare spawn. So Milital explains that these things hold a massive grudge against humans and will try to kill you the second they see you. Derek is caught off guard and asks if they really attack just for looking at them, and Milital tells him it's the truth. The whole idea of a monster that aggressive starts to sink in, and Derek can't help but think how terrifying that is. Milital stops and apologizes for bringing it up right after a scary talk, but she asks if he'll come along with her group. Derek just stands there for a second with a completely blank look on his face. He finally loses it and yells out, wanting to know why he's being dragged into this mess. The rest of the group gets ready while Senji stands there looking serious. Milital stands in front of everyone with Derek by her side. He's carrying a massive hammer as she starts her briefing, saying that as everyone is already aware, the Iron Bear has officially been spotted over in the Stone Tree Forest. The two girls in the crowd listen in closely as the briefing continues. Milital explains that the target is decked out in metal armor and has a weird black ring mark on its neck. She also mentions they need to find out if they can actually use the stuff they get from the hunt for weapons. And then she drops the news that Derek is going to be joining them for the mission. The soldiers all seem pretty stoked to have a pro like him tagging along. Someone says it's the perfect chance to see how their training pays off, while Derek just awkwardly says hello. As they get ready, the reality of the situation sets in. These things are naturally tough, so basic moves won't work. The command goes out for everyone to stay alert, and the crew shouts back in agreement with that. The whole line of wagons starts rolling out toward the forest. A few hours later, Derek finds himself standing at the edge of the Stone Tree Forest, realizing they've finally made it. The group finally steps into the forest, and someone mentions how incredibly dark it is inside. Milital gives the order for everyone to split up and start the search, and the soldiers shout back. On her command to scatter, the troops head out into the thick trees to cover more ground, leaving Milital, Derek, and Comfy standing together. Milital says they should get moving as well. They head deeper in, the only sound being the wind rustling through the dark branches, while the trio walks along the path, staying close together as they navigate the woods. Comfy starts shaking a bit and admits that the idea of real combat always makes her really tense. Derek confesses he's actually a little nervous too, which totally surprises the kid. But he gives her a reassuring smile and says it's going to be fine because they have Milital and her holy attribute with them, and she quickly confirms she's ready. Milital keeps her focus, mentioning that they actually have the upper hand since they're carrying the only gear that actually works for this, specifically the Delete Hammer and Shinma. She knows these are the keys to the whole mission, and as they walk, the special blade hangs ready at her side, a reminder of what they're capable of. The trio moves into a wide opening in the woods while Milital explains that any normal attack just gets healed up instantly. She notes that weapons with a holy attribute are things only someone like Lord Delete could even make, and she lets the guys know that the older blacksmiths tried to use materials from that monster before but couldn't make it work. Looking at Derek, she says this is exactly why they need him. She even jokes about how great it is to hang out with a beautiful upperclassman, calling it a win-win for everyone. Derek thinks about it, realizing that if he can pull off crafting a holy weapon from those materials, they'll finally have a real way to take down those unique anomalies. Milital agrees and Comfy cheers him on, saying she's totally sure Derek can make it happen. But just then, the whole group freezes. Something catches their attention from the shadows. Suddenly, a bunch of goblins with clubs jump out of the brush, catching the group off guard. Comfy completely loses it, screaming that she's about to be eaten, while Derek stands there holding his hammer looking just as stressed out as she is. Milital keeps her cool and counts 5 of the creatures, mentioning that with this many around, there's probably a nest nearby. The goblins start creeping forward, eyes locked on the group and clubs raised, ready to make a move. Derek looks over at Milital and asks if she's actually planning to fight them, but she just tells him there's no way. Since there's no bounty on these guys, she's not wasting the effort. She decides she'll just drive them off instead and reaches down to grab some small stones. She gets a sharp look in her eyes, focusing on her targets as she fires the rocks off with perfect aim. They crack against the goblins' heads, sending them reeling back in pain, and it works like a charm. The monsters start screaming and sprint back into the bushes to get away from her. The goblins look back one last time with pretty frustrated expressions, but they keep running nonetheless, leaving Derek just standing there in total silence, trying to process how she handled that situation so easily. Just as things seem to settle, another pair of goblins jump out, clubs raised and looking for a fight. Comfy completely loses it, looking totally terrified as the monsters close the distance on them. Milital sees them coming and yells for everyone to get back. She's ready to step in, but then Derek suddenly moves past her. She looks on in total shock and calls out his name as he grips his massive smithing hammer and lets out one huge swing, sending every single goblin flying through the air. The two of them can't even believe what they're seeing. Milital and Comfy just stare at him with their mouths hanging open. The goblins hit the ground hard, tumbling over each other in a messy pile before they scramble to their feet and sprint back into the bushes as fast as they can. Derek just stands there with a satisfied look, telling them that all his training finally paid off. Comfy starts clapping her hands and Milital cheers for him, both of them totally hyped by how he handled that. Comfy looks up at him with total stars in her eyes. She tells him he's straight up incredible for how he handled those goblins. Milital chimes in too, saying it's seriously impressive that he's reached this level after only a few weeks of training, making Derek turn bright red. He just scratches his head and gives a shy thanks, clearly not used to getting this much praise. Milital tells them to keep moving, and Derek agrees they should get back on the path to finish their trek through the woods. But just as they start walking, a massive cracking sound echoes from the trees, stopping all three of them dead in their tracks as Comfy loses it, yelling out to ask what that sound was. She's looking around like she's ready to bolt while Derek turns to the pro in the group. He looks pretty worried and asks Milital if she knows what's actually happening. Milital's face goes totally serious. She tells both of them to stay back and get behind her right now. The woods go still for a second, just the empty path sitting there between the thick trees, waiting for the three of them to make a move. They all stand frozen, staring into the dark brush and waiting for whatever made that noise to show up. A weird light suddenly flashes from deep inside the dark bushes, catching Derek completely off guard as someone yells at them to move. They've got to dodge whatever is coming their way right now, but a massive, twisted wooden limb crashes down from the sky. It's huge. Derek and Milital can only look up while the whole area gets buried under a giant cloud of dust and falling leaves from the impact, and Derek just stands there with his eyes wide, totally stunned by how much force was behind that hit. When the dust finally starts to clear, there's a massive crater where the path used to be. The three of them are scattered and everyone is looking pretty rough. Comfy is shaking, Derek is sweating, and even Milital is so shocked she can barely speak, until Comfy asks if they're okay while letting out a panicked yell. She's struggling to wrap her head around the close call. She thanks the commander for the save, but Milital tells her to keep her guard up because the real threat is finally showing up. Out of the trees walks a massive bear wearing full plate armor, ready to fight. Milital identifies the monster as a special anomaly iron bear. Derek is shaking, just staring up at the thing and yelling about how massive it is. Milital tells Comfy to blow her whistle right now, and as the giant bear stares them down, the girl quickly says she's on it. Comfy brings the small whistle to her lips, taking a quick breath as she prepares to signal everyone else. The high-pitched sound rings out across the woods, catching the attention of other people nearby who stop and look around, totally confused. While Derek and Comfy watch from behind, Milital steps out in front and says she's going to be the one to fight this thing. She reaches for her weapon, calling out the name Shinma as she prepares to show what she can really do. The blade comes out and a massive flash of light fills the air, almost blinding everyone nearby as she stands there with a sword made of pure light, telling the bear to get ready and draw its own blade. Everyone watching is stunned to see the sword Shinma transform like that. They can't believe it's actually turned into pure white energy. The big showdown is set, with the armored bear facing off against Milital and her glowing weapon while the others try to stay back. The iron bear narrows its eye, locking its focus on Milital. Then suddenly a flash of movement streaks right past the giant beast, moving so fast that Derek and Comfy are totally shocked. Derek yells out that Milital has just vanished from thin air. She starts using a move called Godspeed Dance, turning into a blur of light, and the bear roars as heavy slashes of energy start hitting its armor from every direction. Derek looks pretty stressed watching the chaos, but Comfy is right there beside him looking totally pumped. Milital takes the fight to the air, leaping high above the monster's head to find an opening, but after she lands, she sees smoke rising from the bear's armor and says there's no way her attack didn't work. Looking at the massive beast, she realizes the monster actually managed to cover up all its vital spots, and the bear's heavy foot slams into the ground, making everything shake as it stays standing. Milital looks completely caught off guard by what's happening right in front of her. The giant armored bear just stands there in the middle of the woods, looking like a tank. It suddenly shifts its weight, making a massive sound as it prepares to do something. Then a whole swarm of giant nuts comes flying at the group from every single angle. An eye narrows, locking onto every single moving object with insane focus in a flash. All the projectiles get swatted away and drop to the dirt like it was nothing. Derek is losing it, saying it's amazing that he managed to block every single nut that came at them, while Comfy joins in, yelling about how impressive the Legion commander is for being that fast. Milital stares the beast down, mentioning that these special anomalies have way more brains than people think. But the bear isn't done yet. It starts a full-on charge, and Milital warns the guys it's coming straight for them. Milital jumps right into the action, telling everyone she's going to handle this on her own, and she stands her ground as the giant bear roars right in her face, trying to scare her off. The fight gets intense fast. She swings her blade, and we can see it reflecting in the beast's eyes. Milital grunts as she tries to keep up with the monster's sheer power, but the bear starts leaning its full weight into her, and she's barely holding it back with her sword. Comfy sees the opening the monster is about to take and yells for the commander to look out. While Derek watches those massive claws get ready to strike, he knows he can't just stand there anymore. He charges in with his huge hammer, shouting for the beast to take this, and he connects perfectly with the bear's jaw, swinging with enough force to send the thing spinning. The armored bear gets tossed back like a toy, sliding through the dirt and crashing into the brush. Milital thanks Derek for jumping in to help, but he just looks worried and says it's not over yet. Comfy tries to help out by shouting that she's going to run and get the other soldiers, but Milital tells her to stay still as the armored bear starts climbing back onto its feet behind them. Everything turns into a blur as the monster moves way faster than they expected, catching them off guard. The beast targets the kid rushing straight for Comfy while she stands there totally frozen, and the bear roars as it lunges with everything it's got, nearly pinning them down in the dirt. Milital grits her teeth, looking like she's blaming herself for letting things get this dangerous for everyone. Derek yells out in a panic, seeing the monster closing in on the two girls at once, but Milital manages to grab Comfy just in time, sliding across the ground to get her clear. Comfy looks up in total shock, barely realizing she's been saved from the beast's charge. The little kid starts losing it, bowing down and yelling to the commander that he's so sorry for everything, but Milital just gives him a wink and tells him to relax, saying she's totally fine with just a few scratches. Derek watches them and starts to panic, wondering what they're supposed to do now that Milital is so beat up. He looks out at the woods and realizes that even though Comfy blew the signal whistle, no soldiers are coming, so he grips his tool tight, telling himself he has to protect the two of them no matter what happens next. But then he stops and realizes that just trying to block the monster isn't what he should be doing. Instead, he gets this look in his eyes and prepares to delete the problem entirely, focusing on his target. The armored bear just stands there like a wall, completely unaware of what's about to hit it. Derek stays silent, sweating from the pressure as he puts all his energy into a single command, and suddenly, the metal armor on the beast's legs starts turning into black dust and falling away. Derek stands there holding his hammer, looking at the monster and wondering. He sees this weird black light coming off it, and realizes it's the exact same glow he sees when he's looking for flaws in blacksmithing materials. He's been seeing it for a while, but now it finally clicks for him. He figures that if he just treats the monster like a raw piece of metal, he can find its weak spot, and just then, a massive cloud of dust kicks up right in front of the beast. Derek looks totally caught off guard while he yells out, asking if the thing just hit him with a pocket sand attack. He's sweating and looks completely confused, but Milital is right behind him, watching his every move with wide eyes as the situation gets even more intense. The armored bear isn't done yet and swings a huge, metal-covered claw down at him with a loud roar. Milital screams out for him as Comfy watches in total fear, thinking it's all over for their teacher, but Derek just sets his feet and winds up for a massive swing, saying that as long as he has his hammer, he's going to win. He puts everything he's got left into the blow, promising to pour every single drop of his mana into this one shot. Derek lets out one final, massive strike that hits with enough force to shake the entire area. And then there's a deafening blast that leaves a giant crater in the middle of the woods, with steam rising from the center as the armored bear is reduced to nothing but a pile of black ash. Derek just sits there on the ground next to his hammer, and he looks completely stunned, staring at the destruction while asking himself what just happened. Up on the ledge, Milital and Comfy are losing it. Milital yells down to ask if he's okay while she slides down the cliff to reach him. Derek is still trying to process his own power, but she asks if he seriously doesn't remember doing this. She grabs his arm and tells him that the second he swung his hammer, a blinding light covered everything, and Derek looks around at the massive hole in the ground, asking if he really caused all this. Milital just nods and confirms it's all him. As they start walking back through the wreckage, Derek just shrugs it off, saying he must have been in the zone, but Comfy doesn't care about the power. She just tackles him in a huge hug, crying that she thought he died, so he just smiles and says he's sorry for the scare. Milital hears a rustling in the nearby bushes and turns her head, while Derek sits on the dirt with Comfy still sobbing into his chest. Milital looks back with a smile and tells him it's just the soldiers who were supposed to be showing up as backup. The squad finally reaches the site and stands there staring at the massive hole left in the earth. One soldier wonders how much power that hit actually had, while the others note the bear is completely dusted. It looks like a meteorite strike, but Derek doesn't care. He just keeps patting Comfy's head. Looking out over the trees, he feels a sense of relief, just glad he was strong enough to keep them both safe from that thing. A few days pass back at the city, and Milital visits Derek to ask how he's holding up. Derek says he's still a little sore, but he'll live, then asks her the same. She says she's already totally fine. Derek just stares off, thinking to himself that it must be nice to have that young energy and fast healing. He then asks if that forest was under military control, and Milital says it was, wondering why he. Derek starts shaking and panicking, pointing at himself while wondering if he's the one who has to pay for all the damage to the forest. Milital just stands there with a totally blank look on her face. But then, she starts laughing and tells him there's no way that's happening. She explains that they're actually doing the opposite by turning the area into a monument to preserve the battle for the next generation. She's all smiles as she reveals they've already officially named the spot the Delete Crater, which just leaves Derek sitting at the table looking completely drained. A little later, he tries to change the subject, mentioning he could hear a ton of shouting from inside. Milital agrees, saying that everyone outside is definitely fired up. Out on the training grounds, the energy is pretty intense. One of the leaders screams at the soldiers for being pathetic when a guy like Derek works so hard, ordering them to start from scratch with 1,000 push-ups right now. Milital looks pretty happy as she mentions how seeing Derek's work really fired the soldiers up. Derek just stands there sweating, not really sure if she's being serious about it. But the kids are already taking it to heart, sprinting through the woods while Comfy shouts out with a ton of energy. Someone cheers for Derek's hard work while Comfy stops to salute the commander. She announces she's heading off to run 10,000 laps around the perimeter, which leaves Derek looking completely dead inside. He can't even process the idea of someone actually trying to run 10,000 laps. And Milital admits that doing that kind of intense training every day would probably kill them. Derek just sighs, saying he guesses it's fine as a one-time thing. They both stand there for a second, just watching Comfy jog away into the distance, until the little girl suddenly stops and turns back toward them with a surprised look on her face, calling out to Milital. Milital asks what's up, and Derek jokingly asks if she's done with the 10,000 laps already. Comfy just stares at him like he's crazy, saying there's no way that happened. Right then, the sound of fancy boots clicking against the ground starts getting closer, and it turns out they aren't alone anymore. A voice announces that a guest from the Glossa Academy of Magic has just arrived. Milital asks if they're expecting a visitor, and the girl walking up seems to realize she's right on schedule. She smiles at Derek, mentioning how it's been 15 years since they last saw each other. Derek just stands there looking completely blank, having no clue who this girl is or why she's calling him Lord. Meanwhile, back at the guild, Sinyan is absolutely drenched in sweat and looking like he's about to have a heart attack because the sword he was working on is snapped clean in half right on the workbench. He starts spiraling, repeating over and over how bad this is while his head spins, since breaking a national treasure is a massive crime that nobody is going to let slide. He's totally panicking, frantically asking himself what he's supposed to do now that he's ruined something so important. He stares at the broken blade in disbelief, terrified of what's going to happen to him, but he tries to force himself to chill out and think of a solution, using his own special deep breathing technique to stop from losing it. Sinyan's eyes snap wide as a desperate idea finally hits him, and he realizes that if the sword is broken, he can just stick the pieces back together. So he starts frantically digging through his storage crates, shouting in relief when he finally finds a bottle of temporary adhesive liquid buried at the bottom. The sun shines over the guild building while the mountains sit quiet in the distance. Sinyan eventually steps out to meet his guests, apologizing for the delay, while Senji remarks that he's actually right on time. But when the kid reaches out to check the work, Sinyan loses it, calling him an amateur and telling him the sword is way too delicate to touch. Senji tries to say something back, but Sinyan gets defensive and asks if the kid is actually doubting his skills. Senji gets flustered and says that's not what he meant, while Sinyan just grunts and turns away. He holds up the sword with a smug look, asking how it looks and pointing out how clean the fix is, but Senji squints at the metal and asks if the blade still looks a bit chipped, making Sinyan snap and tell him he's just seeing things. Sinyan gets defensive and yells at Senji to stop talking without having any proof, and then he decides to just shove the sword back in the box, thinking that as long as it's packed up, he can just blame any damage on the shipping crew later. But as he sets it down, a sharp snapping sound rings out from inside the crate, and the sword pieces clatter across the floor right in front of everyone, leaving Sinyan frozen while Senji and the guard just watch the whole mess. Sinyan starts sweating bullets, his face going pale as he realizes there is absolutely no way to hide this, and the guards don't look impressed at all, just staring him down with total judgment. The rest of the staff members are completely mortified, covering their mouths and wishing they were anywhere else right now. Senji just stares at the broken metal in total shock, and he asks Sinyan if he didn't just claim the sword was fixed, which leaves the guy stuttering and making excuses that don't make any sense. While Sinyan panics, the other blacksmiths just stand in the back, watching their boss completely lose his cool and ruin the guild's reputation. Sinyan stands there sweating bullets, acting like he has no idea what happened. He says it's really weird because he's positive he fixed the thing the right way, but Derek just stays hunched over, shaking with pure rage while Sinyan tries to play it off. The guy actually has the nerve to joke about making it a two-piece sword now. That's the final straw for Derek, who grabs Sinyan by the collar and screams at him for being such a screw-up. Sinyan just panics, wondering what's gotten into him. Derek doesn't even hesitate and just tosses the guy across the room like a piece of trash. And he keeps yelling about Sinyan breaking everything he touches and how he never should have trusted him. Sinyan just curls up on the floor, complaining about him being rude. Suddenly, a cold voice cuts through the room and calls out Sinyan's name, Making Senji step forward with a look that could kill, he points right at him and tells him he's officially under arrest. Sinyan's face goes totally blank as the reality of the situation finally hits him. He's completely out of excuses and out of time. The scene shifts away from the guild to the peaceful streets of Grossa, where everything seems back to normal for a bit as someone starts explaining how things have settled down since the whole mess at the blacksmith guild. Darrett sits back with a cup of tea, looking surprisingly chill as he mentions that he was actually kicked out of his old guild. Milital sits across from him, shaking with anger as she says she can't believe they'd banish a blacksmith as talented as him, and she starts losing her cool, stabbing her cake while calling the guild master the definition of incompetent, which definitely makes Darrett a bit nervous. Moving on to the road outside, a carriage speeds away as a guard yells at the passenger inside to sit still and act right. Turns out Sinyan is stuck inside, sitting between two guards in handcuffs while he wonders how his life turned into such a mess. He just sits there gritting his teeth in total frustration. And as he thinks about Darrett, he starts convincing himself that all of this is actually the blacksmith's fault. Sinyan gets this really dark look in his eyes and tells himself he's definitely going to get his revenge no matter what. Back at the Grossa Army headquarters, the soldiers are busy training while someone apologizes for making a big deal out of the personal blacksmith situation. Milital tells Darrett she's willing to listen to what he has to say for now, and he agrees as they walk past the guards. Milital leads the way through the grounds and points out that their destination is finally coming into view. She explains to Darrett that the large building right in front of them is the official smithing facility for the Glossa army. Darrett looks pretty stunned by the scale of the place. He says it's exactly what he expected from the National Army because the building is huge. Milital doesn't waste any time and pulls the door open, calling out to let everyone inside know she's arrived. The workers inside are busy, but one guy in the front spots her immediately. He yells out for the Lord Commander, and the whole crew drops what they're doing to line up. Someone barks an order to salute as Milital and Darrett walk in. Milital keeps it professional and tells them all to stand at ease while Darrett follows her, looking pretty impressed, but the workers are definitely curious about the stranger with her. One of the guys asks the commander who the man behind her is. Milital gets a proud look on her face as she introduces him. She tells them this is Lord Darrett, the man who forged her magic sword Sinma. The whole room goes dead silent as the smiths just stare. They're all completely shocked to be standing in front of the guy who made her weapon. Darrett gives a shy smile and scratches his head, telling everyone it's nice to meet them and that his name is Darrett. The workers start whispering immediately. One guy is totally blown away to meet a legend, while another thinks he just looks like some random old guy. The gossip keeps going as they wonder if Milital is being played, especially since the sword Sinma doesn't even have an official maker's mark. So the mood in the room is pretty skeptical. They just can't bring themselves to believe this plain-looking guy made such a famous weapon. Milital decides to change the subject and brings up the current situation, so she asks where Lord Nanahikari is hiding. The workers look pretty awkward and tell her that there's a bit of a problem with that. They point toward the empty forge and explain that the guy barely did any work before he just up and vanished. Darrett realizes this sounds way too familiar while the workers explain they tried to give the guy hints about his laziness, but it didn't help. Darrett asks if this is what she meant by circumstances back then. Milital just nods. Because the truth is that Nanahikari only has the job because he throws massive amounts of money at the National Army to keep his position as their exclusive smith. It turns out this guy is the only son of the Duke of Felgrand, basically living a life where he can do whatever he wants. Milital says he's a total jerk and a terrible blacksmith, but they just have to take it because of his family name, leaving Darrett thinking that annoying people are the same in every world. Milital asks him to step up and show this guy what real talent looks like, but then, the door suddenly bangs open and someone walks in. Nanahikari strolls into the room looking way too fancy, immediately complaining about how hot and stuffy the shop is standing there with this smug, sparkly look on his face like he owns the place. Milital and the workers are caught off guard while someone shouts out Nanahikari's name. Darrett just stares at him, thinking about how stupid it is to wear those clothes in a workshop. It reminds him exactly of Sinyan. Milital demands to know where he's been, and he just brushes it off saying he was out on a date. Even when a worker asks about the urgent repairs, he just looks down at the sword and acts like it's nothing important. Nanahikari casually tosses the sword over and tells them here. As if it's no big deal, the blade clatters onto the floor, making one of the workers jump back and yell out in surprise, while the others can't believe what they're seeing. Darrett snaps at him, telling him he shouldn't be throwing unsheathed weapons around, but Nanahikari just strikes a smug pose, asking if the job isn't perfect. Darrett gives a really awkward, forced thank you, trying to keep things civil despite the obvious tension. Darrett just looks down at the weapon with a completely exhausted expression, and it's easy to see why. The sword is in terrible shape and hasn't even been maintained properly. The group stands there in silence for a second. Durate realizes Milital really needs their help with this guy, but then Nana Hikari suddenly stands up and calls out to them. Durate is caught off guard, wondering what's coming next as the guy puts a hand to his face and acts all dramatic. He starts complaining about how he went through all the trouble of fixing the sword, and before anyone can react, he snaps. He grabs Durate by the shirt and yells right in his face, demanding to know why he looks so miserable after all that work. Durate just stands there with his face in the shadows, looking like he's reached his absolute limit with all this drama. Suddenly, Nana Hikari grabs him by the shirt and starts shaking him, causing a huge scene that's got the workers nearby jumping back in total shock and demanding that if he's actually a blacksmith, then he needs to fix the weapon properly. Durate just stares at him, completely stunned by the guy's nerve, while the younger guy starts yelling, asking what the old man wants and telling him to let go immediately. Milital steps in to try and keep the peace, telling Nana Hikari to calm down before dropping the bombshell that Durate is the legendary smith from Lighton who forged the Shinma. The kid freezes up instantly, his face going pale as he stammers out a confused response, unable to believe who he's actually talking to, and Milital keeps the pressure on, suggesting that a first-rate smith like him should have no problem working as a two-man team with Durate. Nana Hikari goes quiet for a second, clearly thinking things over before deciding on a new plan. He brushes his hair back and tells Durate he wants to see just how good he actually is, leaving Durate wondering what he means by skill as the guy throws his arms out and loudly declares that they're going to settle this with a smithing contest. Nana Hikari explains that they'll both forge a sword and use them to fight, with the first one to break losing. Durate just listens and says he gets it as the guy holds up 2 fingers and says there are actually 2 conditions for this whole thing. First off, he points to a pile of junk and says Durate is only allowed to use the materials right there. And for the second condition, he points out someone in the distance who will be the one actually using Durate's sword in the fight. Everyone turns to look at a tiny kid standing alone in the middle of the crowd. The girl introduces herself as Comfrey from the beginner class, which leaves Durate looking totally confused about what's happening. He can't believe it and yells her name out loud, realizing just how much of a disadvantage he's at. But Nana Hikari just lets out a long sigh while the little girl starts flailing her arms around in the background. Durate crosses his arms and finally agrees to the job, making Milital freak out and yell at him. Nana Hikari says the deal is officially settled, leaving Milital groaning as she realizes there's no going back now. Nana Hikari points his finger and shouts that the big showdown happens in 5 days, warning Durate that if he loses, he's headed straight back to the middle of nowhere. Durate just crosses his arms and fires back with his own condition. If he wins, the kid has to actually start taking his work as a smith seriously for one. Nana Hikari scoffs and looks away, saying he'll make a special exception and let Durate use the local forge, which just makes Durate wonder why he's acting so stuck up. Milital bows deeply and apologizes for things getting way out of hand, but Durate tells her it's fine while people in the crowd start whispering about the commander. The little girl, Comfrey, is basically in tears. She's totally overwhelmed and says she only showed up to get her sword fixed, not get dragged into some crazy duel. Durate looks at her and tells her not to worry, promising he's going to forge a sword that's literally impossible to break in the fight, which makes everyone go quiet. He looks over at the forge and explains that making top-tier gear when you only have a pile of junk to work with is exactly how a real blacksmith shows what he's actually made of. He gives them a confident wink and tells them both to just leave everything to him. The 2 girls look up at him with sparkling eyes, totally inspired. Smoke drifts from the chimney as the real work finally starts. The forge fire roars as the temperature starts to climb inside the stone oven. Durate stands in the middle of the shop and realizes the D-rank materials he's got are actually plenty to work with, right when a knock comes from the door. He pulls on his thick leather gloves and says it's finally time to get moving. While Milital walks in and greets him as Sir, Durate asks if she wants to watch him work for the first time in forever. And once he tells her she just has to stay back a bit, she gets all excited and agrees. Milital takes a seat on a bench in the corner to stay out of the way, and Durate reaches into the heat with his tongs to pull out the glowing metal. He stares down at the anvil, knowing that all the complex plans he needs for this sword, every single blueprint and detail he's ever learned, are already locked in his mind as he focuses in. He lets out a breath and swings the hammer down hard, sending a massive flash of light through the room as he hits the steel. Milital watches him with a smile, just thinking about how great the sound of his hammer is. Sparks fly everywhere as Durate gets back to work. He hasn't held a hammer in weeks, but he can feel his blacksmith blood boiling as he gets into the rhythm of the forge. A huge grin spreads across his face because he just can't help it. He really loves smithing. And he picks up a minor thunder mana stone to boost the weapon's sharpness, knowing it'll make the cutting power way better. Looking completely focused, he decides he's going to forge the ultimate sword for Comfy no matter what. He sits down to finish the job, knowing this is exactly what he needs to be doing right now. Derek lets out a soft sound as he finishes, and Milital is shocked, asking if he's actually done already. He just gives a quick reply while she points out that after 30 years of work, his smithing speed is just on another level. Derek starts sweating as he looks at the results, wondering if it's actually an S rank. It's way higher than he expected, but he tries to tell himself that's impossible. Milital asks if he isn't trying a bit too hard with this one, and Derek just laughs it off while looking a little embarrassed. Milital yells out to everyone in the courtyard to get their attention because she's hyped to announce that Derek's sword is finally finished, so she tells Comfy to come over. The crowd starts buzzing, talking about how Derek is a top-tier blacksmith and his speed is just insane, making Comfy snap into a salute while asking if it's really done already. Derek stands there holding the blade, admitting that the whole process went surprisingly fast, so he looks down at the hilt and prepares to show off what he's just created. He holds it high as lightning bolts shoot out from the blade, which introduces itself as Kamina, an S-rank lightning sword. Everyone watching just freezes with their mouths open, completely shocked by the power coming off the weapon, and as the crowd whispers about the crazy energy, Derek hands it over to Comfy, warning her to be careful since it's dangerous. Comfy stares at the glowing blade with total wonder, thinking it's the most beautiful sword she's ever seen. Milital looks Comfy in the eye and tells her that Derek put his whole heart into forging this blade, so she needs to do her absolute best to stay alive. Comfy salutes with the glowing sword, promising to live up to those feelings. To get ready for the blacksmithing duel, Milital announces she's taking full charge of the kids' training. The soldiers in the background start losing it because they know how intense their commander is, and Milital tells Comfy to be ready because the hard training starts tomorrow morning. Comfy looks pretty terrified, but manages to stutter out an answer while the sun sets over the city. Everyone is rooting for the kid to give it her all, but things are much louder over at the Nanahikari Manor, where the young noble is screaming his head off about what his father did to him. He's throwing a fit because his beautiful arm has a red mark on it, calling the whole thing completely unforgivable. He sits at his table fuming and calls over his maid, Ajin, who looks absolutely done with his whining as she gives him a short, blunt response. Nanahikari is still on edge after his father's visit. He jumps in his seat when Ajin approaches the table, looking completely freaked out. He realizes that even though his maid is great at her job, she really gives him the creeps. He shoves his arm toward her and demands she find some kind of evidence on it so he can sue his old man, but Ajin doesn't even blink. She just tells him she's not doing that. Nanahikari loses it and asks what she means, so she starts wrapping his arm with a bandage anyway. As she works, she mentions that the young master's arm is actually fine. She finishes the knot and bluntly tells him he's perfectly healthy. Nanahikari sits there growling to himself while Ajin moves on, asking about the weird pile of glowing rocks sitting on the table. Nanahikari gets his confidence back and brags about the S-rank materials he took from the family vault, stuff like dragon scales and flame stones. He orders her to take the stash to the best blacksmiths in the country to forge a top-tier sword. Ajin just says she understands, leaving Nanahikari fuming alone. He clenches his fist and swears he's going to get his revenge on that old man no matter what. It's the first day of training and Milital is geared up and ready to start. She tells Comfy that 5 days is nowhere near enough time to actually get better at swordsmanship. Derek watches from the side as Milital points out that they have no idea who that spoiled brat Nanahikari is going to pick as an opponent. Derek stands there looking pretty stressed out about the whole situation. Milital explains that the main goal is just making sure the sword doesn't snap before the fight is over. She looks right at Comfy and asks if she understands what she needs to do, and the kid shouts back that she's got it. She just has to dodge or parry every single attack. Milital says that's fine, but as for the rest of her training, she draws her sword so fast it makes Comfy jump. She lunges forward and yells that Comfy is going to have to learn the hard way with her body, before jumping high into the air, leaving Comfy standing there totally shocked as the real training begins. Derek watches the training from the sidelines and completely loses it, yelling out in shock, as Milital swings her sword with serious speed. Comfy looks terrified as the blade comes flying right at her. Milital barks out orders, telling the kid not to block with the flat of the sword but to catch it with the edge. The kid manages to stay on her feet and cheers, feeling pretty good about herself for a second, but Milital doesn't give her a break. She shouts for the next round and Comfy tries to stay ready, even though the pressure is getting to her. Milital yells at her again to catch the incoming strike with her blade, and the sound of metal hitting metal rings out across the training ground. Comfy manages to hold her ground, and she realizes with a look of surprise that she actually did it. She's just catching her breath when Milital completely vanishes. Comfy looks around in a panic and asks where the Legion commander went, only for Milital to show up right behind her. She holds her sword to the kid's neck and says that's the match, leaving Comfy totally stunned. Milital keeps the pressure on, yelling at Comfy to never let her guard down in a fight and asking if she's trying to get killed. The kid can only shout back how sorry she is while trying to keep up. Even though she's struggling, she begs Milital for just one more round, desperate to prove she can actually do this. Darrett watches from the side, thinking about how this is way too intense for a first day of training, and it finally catches up to her. Comfy collapses right onto the dirt, completely out of energy as she just lies there sweating and gasping for air. She manages to thank Milital for the lesson even though she looks like she can't move a muscle. But then, Milital drops some big news, telling her that starting tomorrow they're moving on to training with the Kaminas. Comfy just lets out a weak reply from the ground as Milital turns to Darrett with a smile and tells him to get those Kaminas ready. Darrett looks totally stressed out, but yells that he'll get it done. Night falls over the area, the moon is out and the stars are everywhere. Inside the mess hall, everyone is gathered for a meal together. The kids are absolutely destroying their food, shoveling it down like they haven't eaten in days after that brutal workout. One of the guys at the table mentions that training with the commander is basically like being in a real war, and Comfy gets totally flustered, asking if they were actually watching her out there. The boys just grin, admitting they were keeping an eye on her from the shadows the whole time, which starts a whole conversation about how impressive she is. They talk about how crazy it is that she can keep up with Milital's pace, especially since she's so small, but Comfy isn't having it. She stuffs her face and tells them calling her tiny is uncalled for. As the guys laugh, one of them notices she's finishing up and she stands right up, telling everyone she's heading out for the night. The guy next to her is surprised she's done so fast, but the boys just go back to their meal, chatting away while they finish their bread, and as Comfy starts walking down the hall, someone calls out her full name, Comfrey. She stops in her tracks and gets a total surprise when someone drops a big warm towel over her head. She's caught off guard for a second as the older boys smile at her, telling her she needs to make sure she doesn't catch a cold after such a hard workout. Comfy just gives them a quick, polite bow and goes on her way. Darrett stands in the shadows, staying quiet for a second while he watches, under the bright full moon near the castle. He spots Comfy and says there she is way out in the field, practicing her sword swings alone in the dark. Comfy lets out a shout, putting every bit of energy she has into her training, jumping and slashing through the air while Darrett watches her every move. Once she finishes her set, she wipes the sweat off her face and catches her breath, just as Darrett walks over and tells her she did a great job. Comfy looks up, totally surprised to see him standing there, and asks if that's really him, but Darrett just gives her a warm smile and asks what she's doing out training this late. So she explains that this is just her normal nightly routine. She says she just wants to catch up to the commander, even if it's only by a little bit. With a big smile, she adds that Milital is basically her idol, which makes Darrett nod. He tells her he gets it, but since he knows Milital's training is so hardcore, he got a little worried and had to come check on her. Comfy tells him he's a really kind person for that, which makes Darrett rub his neck wondering if he was just being nosy, though she quickly tells him it's fine. Comfy looks at the glowing weapon, thinking to herself that she can't let such a beautiful blade get broken because of her. She's determined to give it her all, gushing about how it's such a wonderful sword with that crackling thunder and tingling sensation. Darrett stands there listening as she keeps going, and it clearly catches him off guard. He's completely silent for a second, so Comfy looks up at him, sounding a bit worried as she asks if he's okay. Darrett snaps out of it and apologizes for the intrusion, telling her he's going to head back now while she wishes him a good night. He starts walking down the empty street under the glow of the lamps, the sound of his boots hitting the pavement while he thinks back to the look on Comfy's face. He remembers how focused she was, and then how much she truly loved that sword, which really hits home for him. He thinks about how long it's been since anyone appreciated a sword he forged that much, and honestly, he can't even remember the last time he felt this way. It's been a while, but as he walks home through the quiet night, a small, genuine smile finally spreads across his face. Darrett gives himself a quick, all right, as he starts walking away, deciding it's time to start. He heads down the street humming, thinking about how he's going to adjust Kamina next. 4 days pass by, and the scene shifts over to a big mansion where someone calls out to the guildmaster. You can tell this guy is looking incredibly annoyed and ready to snap. Nana Hikari points a sword at a nervous blacksmith and asks why this thing is even A rank, complaining that it has zero flexibility. The blacksmith is sweating bullets, trying to explain that working with S-rank materials is actually really hard, but Nana Hikari just calls him an incompetent fool and tells him to get the hell out. The poor guy tries to bring up his payment, so Nana Hikari glares at him with a scary look and asks if he should just pay him with his life instead, making the guy run for it. Nana Hikari turns around and barks an order to bring the Asian one to his room, leaving Agent to just stand there and calmly say she understands. Detroit, the guy they call the strong-armed destroyer, walks into the room and asks his master if he was called for inside. Nana Hikari is just chilling and picking up his cup of tea. Detroit stands against the wall and finishes explaining the whole situation to Nana Hikari and his maid. Nana Hikari leans on the table complaining about how that sword was supposed to be S rank, but Detroit tells him that rank doesn't really mean anything, and says it doesn't matter what kind of weapon it is because he's just going to snap it in half anyway. He starts straining and yells that he'll do it just like this, bending a thick metal bar with his bare hands. The metal clangs on the floor, but Nana Hikari just sits there in silence. Detroit just gives a little huff and crosses his arms like it was the easiest thing in the world. Looking at the ruined metal on the floor, it's clear this match is basically over before it even started, and Nana Hikari gets a smug look on his face, saying how fun this is even though he thinks the whole thing is a drag. Nana Hikari sits back with his tea and tells his maid, Ajin, to make sure his parents never find out about any of this. She just gives a quick nod and promises she won't say a word, but she just stands there with a completely blank look on her face. Moving on to the big day, the sun is out and the smithing contest is finally ready to kick off. But fast-forwarding to after Nana Hikari gets kicked out of the family, a mysterious voice from the shadows asks Ajin for an update on their secret plan. Ajin stands alone in the courtyard and has to break the news that the whole plan has totally failed, explaining that it's all because a top-tier blacksmith named Darrett showed up and took the spot as the exclusive smith for the Grossa army. The person she's talking to says that failure isn't something they tolerate, which has Ajin dropping to the ground and apologizing like her life depends on it. However, the voice tells her that she's still got some use to them, and then a dark figure shows up in the reflection of a mirror, telling her they're going to give her one more chance to get it right. Ajin keeps her head down and tells them she's honored that they're being so nice about it. The shadowy figure in the mirror finishes up by saying he's got high expectations for what's coming next, leaving Ajin standing there looking completely drained after the meeting. Later on, a random girl shows up in front of the group, and Darrett has to ask who she actually is. She seems shocked he doesn't recognize her, and she just stands there with her hair covering her eyes, looking mysterious until she suddenly brightens up and introduces herself as Izu, calling him Lord Derate with this weirdly heavy energy around her. Darrett starts sweating a bit because the vibe she's giving off feels way too familiar for comfort, but then it clicks, and he remembers how they used to play together all the time when they were kids. Izu is just happy he finally remembers, and she gets all sparkly and excited, telling him how happy she is to see him again while Milital watches from the side looking totally annoyed. Izu starts getting lost in her own world, blushing and talking about how she's always thinking about him, which is when Darrett tries to say he's just tired, but Milital has seen enough and steps in to tell the girl to get away from him. Izu notices Milital and calls her the Legion commander, but Darrett's more focused on the fact that she's still carrying that doll around everywhere, which makes Izu laugh as she tells Milital she really is still just a child. Milital doesn't take the joke well at all, looking like she's about to snap, and she stands there with this dark energy, saying she was just thinking about settling things with Izu once and for all. The two of them stare each other down with sparks literally flying between them. Darrett steps in sweating, trying to get them to calm down by asking Izu if she came here for a reason, and she quickly realizes he's right. She starts telling Darrett she came to talk to him about something, but then some loud footsteps come out of nowhere as someone yells for her, and it's a short guy with a mustache who looks at Darrett and asks who the hell he's supposed to be, while Izu introduces the newcomer as Vice Principal Bayer. Izu tells the guy that Darrett is actually the National Army's exclusive blacksmith, making Darrett give a pretty awkward hello. The vice principal loses it, shouting that she shouldn't lie because there's no way a filthy old man is a master blacksmith, which leaves Darrett completely crushed. Bayer is absolutely fuming that Darrett had the nerve to talk back to him. He starts planning to give Izu some private lessons, once they get back as punishment for bringing the guy around. Izu isn't backing down though, telling the vice principal he needs to take back what he said, and then Milital steps up, saying she'll personally vouch for Darrett's skills. The second Milital speaks, Bayer completely flips his tone and starts acting like a total creep, calling her ravishing and saying he's honored to hear from her. Darrett just stands there watching the whole thing, thinking about how pathetic the old guy is acting. Suddenly someone's voice cuts through the crowd, shouting Darrett's name, and it turns out to be Sinyan, who's yelling into a phone about how he's following instructions but the tool broke on him yet again. Darrett realizes exactly who it is the moment he hears the name, while everyone else just watches the scene unfold. Sinyan keeps apologizing to the person on the other end of the line, admitting he just can't seem to stop breaking his equipment. Bayer catches sight of him and gets a shady look on his face, before pointing Sinyan out and calling him over, which just makes Sinyan turn around and wonder what the guy wants with him. Bayer starts gushing over Sinyan, telling the guy he's got incredible talent. He even says it's a total waste for him to be stuck in a place like this, which leads to Darrett and the rest of the group just standing there with blank faces. They honestly can't believe what they're seeing right now, and then Bayer asks how it sounds if Sinyan comes to work under him. He actually offers the guy a job as a special instructor. Sinyan can barely process it, asking if he's really talking about him. The word special just keeps bouncing around in his head until he completely loses his mind, throwing his hands up and screaming that he really is a natural-born genius. Bayer decides they're leaving right away to report back to the academy. Izu tries to get him to wait, but the guy is already moving on. He gives Izu a real creepy look and tells her that once they're back, she needs to come straight to his office. Sinyan can't help himself and starts bragging to Darrit, telling him to just give up because their skill levels aren't even close. And he tells Darrit he better spend the rest of his life bowing down to him, acting like he's finally won the whole thing. Darrit just stands there looking completely done with the situation. He doesn't even have words for how stupid this is. Izu, Milital, and Senji just stand there looking completely stunned by the weird scene they just witnessed. It's like they can't even process how things ended up this way. Later on, they meet back at the Army HQ to finally take a breather. Izu tells them they all did a great job today as they sit down for some tea, making Darrit think about how wild it is that the academy actually has a guy like Bayer as a vice principal. Milital just nods, saying that dealing with a person like that has to be pretty exhausting. Izu tells her it's really no big deal, but she still feels the need to apologize for all the trouble and disturbance. Darrit points out that becoming head instructor is actually a huge promotion for her, and Milital adds that she's just glad Izu is finally being recognized. But Izu just brushes it off with a smile. She tells Darrit that everything she's achieved is really just because of the staff he made for her, which immediately makes Darrit stop and think. He gets this weird feeling that he's heard those exact words somewhere before, and then Izu asks him to take a quick look at it. She pulls the weapon out right there, revealing the great mega staff known as Diwand, an S-rank weapon with a holy attribute that looks incredibly powerful. Darrit stares at the staff in his hand, looking completely lost. He thinks to himself that he has definitely never seen this weapon before, and Izu explains that it's actually just the toy staff he made for her a long time ago. She tells him that it somehow evolved into this, which really throws Darrit for a loop. He starts wondering why every single weapon he makes keeps evolving into something crazy like this, but he decides to get down to business and asks what she wanted to discuss. Izu starts explaining what's been happening at the academy, saying that they're currently doing some really serious research into the holy attribute. Since Darrit is the one who created the staff, she asks if he'd be willing to give them his professional opinion on the matter. Darrit doesn't even hesitate and tells her he'd be happy to help out, making Izu look pretty thrilled as she thanks him. Just then, Milital speaks up, saying she's actually gotten pretty interested in the holy attribute lately as well. Since she doesn't have any missions on her plate right now, she asks to tag along and watch. Izu agrees and suggests they head back to the academy immediately, so Darrit just asks them to wait a second while he grabs his hammer. Izu triggers her Saintship teleport, and the three of them get wrapped up in light as they warp out of there and show up right in front of a massive estate. Izu lets them know they've arrived, and Milital can't get over how beautiful the grounds look, while Darrit just stands there taking it all in. Izu officially welcomes them to the Glossa Magic Academy, which looks like a total palace with fountains and everything. Darrit keeps his massive hammer close as they start heading inside, but Izu stops him for a second to say they need to go pay their respects to the headmaster first. They head into a fancy office where a woman sitting behind a big desk welcomes them. The woman looks right at them and introduces herself as Elena Grossa, the headmaster of the whole academy. Milital greets her by saying it's been a long time, and Elena agrees that they haven't seen each other in a while. Darrit introduces himself as Durate, but as he says it's a pleasure to meet her, he starts wondering if they've actually crossed paths before. Elena looks at the group and confirms that Darrit is the guy who made the holy attribute weapon, and then she gets straight to the point, asking him to help out with the academy's research into that power. Izu chimes in to mention that the headmaster is actually the queen's younger sister, which makes everything click for Darrit. He starts to realize just how high stakes this situation really is. Elena smiles but keeps it real, saying she's nice to people who are good at their jobs but has no time for losers. So she expects big results, leaving Darrit pretty shaken up as they head out, but they don't get far before someone screams for Izu. It's Vice Principal Bayer, and he's already losing it, yelling at Izu for not seeing him first and complaining about her bringing Darrit along. Bayer gets right in his face, shouting about why a low-level normie like him is even allowed on the grounds, and the constant screaming is so loud that Darrit just holds his head, feeling a massive headache coming on. But then things get physical when a hand suddenly reaches out and grabs someone's arm. Darrit looks over and sees Izu looking completely terrified, and someone yells her name. Turns out Bayer has grabbed her by the arm and is lifting her off the ground, even though she's telling him to let go. The guy gets way too close to her face, acting super creepy and asking if she's really trying to defy her own vice principal. But Izu snaps back that his job title doesn't let him do whatever he wants, just as Darrit steps in and grabs the guy. Bayer absolutely loses it, screaming about how he's the embodiment of all the wisdom in the academy and telling her she should be ashamed. Darrett squeezes the guy's arm hard and asks if he's finally going to stop bothering Izu, which makes Bayer give up and beg to be let go. Darrett tries to say something else to him, but Bayer is already running for his life, thinking he needs to get out of there right now. The whole situation leaves Darrett looking totally exhausted, just standing there with his hammer. As he bolts through the doors, Bayer yells back that his running away is actually just wonderful advice. He's giving himself leaving the group to finally walk through the gates and get away from the weirdo. Milital asks Izu if she's doing alright after that mess. While Darrett asks if she's brought any of this up with the headmaster yet, Darrett tells her to just let them know whenever she needs help, and Milital promises they've got her back, making Izu give them a quiet thanks. She starts to say something but then just puts on a smile and tells them she's doing fine, though she looks away with a sad expression, admitting she's actually just used to people treating her like that, leaving Darrett and Milital standing there in total silence, feeling pretty bad for what she has to deal with. Izu suddenly claps her hands together to snap out of it, saying it's time to get moving, and she tells Darrett that she's going to introduce him to all the students as Lord Delete. She looks way more cheerful now, mentioning that everyone at the academy has been waiting to meet him. So she leads the way toward the auditorium, while Milital says they should get going, showing off the crazy list of legendary weapons Darrett has built, from magic swords to his own massive hammer. Inside the big auditorium, Izu stands on stage and tells the whole crowd that she has someone she wants to introduce. She explains to the surprised students that the man standing with her is actually the one who made her magic wand, making the room start whispering as Izu introduces him as Master Darrett, while he just gives a super awkward, nervous hello. The students aren't really buying it though, whispering about how he's just some old guy who doesn't look important at all. Even Darrett thinks to himself that they've got a point about him not looking very dignified. Izu keeps going and tells everyone that he's crafted tons of holy weapons, like the massive hammer he carries around, and she adds that he even made the sword used by Milital, the commander of the army, who steps up right then, pulling her blade out to show off the craftsmanship while it shines in front of the whole room. The students completely lose it, staring at the weapon in total shock because they can't believe how high quality it is, leaving Milital standing there with a proud smile, feeling pretty good about the reaction she's getting. The students start calling out to Izu, saying they really want to see Darrett actually forge a weapon. They figure seeing him in action would make all those crazy stories about holy weapons way more believable, and Izu looks back at them and admits that their request makes a lot of sense. She turns to Darrett and asks if he's down for it, mentioning they already have the smithy and all the materials ready to go. Darrett just smiles and tells her it's no problem at all, so he decides that since they're at a magic academy, he might as well try his hand at making a staff. The whole class starts cheering, getting super hyped to see a master blacksmith actually work his magic right in front of them. Meanwhile, things are way less hype over at the vice principal's office, where Bayer is having a total meltdown, stomping around and cursing out Darrett. He's yelling about how he hates violence and calling everyone cowards, while he dramatically holds up his arm, complaining about how red and sore it is from their earlier run-in. He doesn't stop there though, moving on to cry about how Izu had the nerve to turn down his invitation. He's just throwing a massive fit in front of some guy in a suit, who looks completely done with the drama, asking what he's even supposed to do about any of this. Bayer stands there in the middle of the office looking like he just saw a ghost, clutching his face in total shock as the tall guy in the suit tells him to just chill out and not do anything for now. Bayer clears his throat to try and act like he wasn't just freaking out, giving a little grunt to save face. The guy starts acting like he owns the place, demanding some fresh clothes and making sure Bayer knows he only wears the high-end brands. Bayer is just sweating, looking at this dude and wondering if he really has to put up with this attitude. The guy just asks what his problem is and where he's supposed to be sleeping, so Bayer tells him he'll get the clothes and that he's putting him up in the special guest suite over at the academy dorms. The guy absolutely loves that, saying it's the kind of high-class treatment a guy like him actually deserves. He mentions he'll miss the stables a little bit though, which confuses the hell out of Bayer since there's a literal memory of the guy sleeping in the hay with horses. But the guy just keeps on bragging about how his circle of powerful friends is getting bigger every day. Bayer gets a smug look on his face too, telling the guy he's lucky he even got the chance to meet someone as important as him. The two of them end up laughing together like they're the best of friends, and it looks like Bayer is finally in a good mood after his earlier meltdown. Agent is standing there waiting when the guys walk in, calling out to the tall suit guy and telling him she's been expecting him. Bayer introduces her as his personal secretary, and the tall suit guy is immediately obsessed, going on about how beautiful she is while Bayer keeps the real reason he hired an outsider woman to himself, knowing the academy would freak out if they found out. The suit guy starts kissing up to Bayer, telling him the whole world is just wrong for not recognizing how great of a guy he is. Agent just stands there with a totally blank look on her face, clearly not buying any of the garbage they're saying. Bear eats it all up though, blushing and shouting that his agent is the only one who truly understands what he's worth. He gets way too excited and tries to pull her toward the bed, calling her his ideal woman, but she quickly tells him to wait and pokes him on the nose, promising he can have her once their business is finished, telling him that waiting just makes the payoff better. Bayer totally falls for it and decides to prioritize the job first, glad that they're finally on the same page. Agent goes right back to her serious self, bringing up one last detail they need to figure out regarding their plans. Agent makes it clear that her plan doesn't just stop here. She wants to get rid of Darrett for good too. Bayer is totally on board, wearing this huge, creepy grin while the tall suit guy just stands there looking like he's about to have a heart attack. Agent brings up how Darrett humiliated her buyer, thinking back to when he was just doing his thing at the academy, making things look way too easy while everyone watched him work. To her, what he did was a massive insult that can't be ignored, and she's decided that the only way for him to make it right is to pay with his life, all while Darrett stays clueless about the target on his back. Bayer absolutely loves the idea and starts cheering, telling her to get everything ready for their move immediately. Agent tells him she's already one step ahead and can show him the setup right now, which actually catches him by surprise for one. Bayer starts shaking with pure excitement, whispering to himself that the time has finally come to get what he wants. Agent just stands there with this really dark look on her face, like she's got something way worse planned than she's letting on. They head down into the basement, and the suit guy can't believe how big the room is, unaware of the magic circle waiting for them on the table. Agent tells Bayer that the day he finally becomes king is right around the corner. Bayer adds that soon she'll be queen too, and she agrees. The suit guy looks around the room, thinking to himself that while the place is huge, the interior design is actually pretty bad. Bayer gets this intense look on his face, whispering that he's absolutely going to do it. He's going to take over this whole country. He starts ranting about how he's way too big for his current job, saying he's not the type of guy who'd ever be happy just being a vice principal. His plan is to pull the strings at the Magic Academy to start a coup, figuring he can just seize the throne once the nation falls apart, leaving him in charge of everything. He laughs because the academy is full of talented people he can use as pawns, making him feel like his plan is perfect. Moving on, Agent calls him over to show him something, telling him she finally has the specific item they were talking about earlier, a Rank S Darkness Power Stone. It's a high-level item with a dark attribute that's glowing with a strange energy right in front of them. Bayer is totally obsessed, calling it a beautiful jewel, and saying this dark power is the one thing they really need to make the plan work. He watches her walk by the stone, thinking to himself that being able to get items like this is the second big reason he hired Agent. Bayer stares at the stone, thinking he has no clue how Agent got it, but she's basically his savior for bringing it. Agent tells Bayer he needs to break the jewel and take that dark power for himself, but Bayer just stands there thinking he should probably be careful, so he steps up to the platform just in case anything goes wrong while telling Sinyan to step up and use his strength to smash the jewel. Sinyan is all for it, saying he's got this. Sinyan grabs the dark stone and starts straining with everything he has, trying to crush it with his bare hands. Bayer watches him struggle and laughs to himself, thinking the guy is a total fool if he thinks simple strength is enough. And then suddenly the stone actually starts to crack. Shards of the dark jewel fly everywhere as it breaks apart. Sinyan yells out that he finally did it, right as a massive cloud of dark energy starts pouring out and starts wrapping around him. He tells the power to enter his body while Bayer watches the dark energy get absorbed. The energy starts swirling around like crazy, and Sinyan gets this look on his face like things aren't going exactly to plan. Bayer stands there glowing as he absorbs the energy. He looks totally thrilled, saying how wonderful this power feels. Agent watches him with a smirk, telling Mr. Bayer that the display was absolutely magnificent. The guy in the suit just stands there with no clue what's going on. Meanwhile, someone mentions it's probably best to just leave this idiot alone, and Bayer starts chanting, asking the darkness to give him control over everything while he yells out "Dark Manipulate" to trigger the spell. The dark energy reacts as sharp black shards burst from the floor. Darrett shows the academy students a staff he just finished working on. Milital and Izu watch him, they're both looking totally impressed. The kids crowd around Darrett, everyone's excited to see his work. One of the students asks which elements have the best affinity with the holy attribute. Darrett thinks for a second and tells them it's fire and lightning, but he also points out that non-attribute is really straightforward, making it way easier for anyone to handle. Darrett finishes up his lesson and asks the kids if they have any other questions, but a weird noise suddenly stops him. He turns around with a look of total shock on his face because one of the students just collapses. Darrett rushes over and asks the kid if he's okay, but the boy can barely get a word out before groaning in pain. Darrett holds onto the kid and asks him where it hurts, but the boy goes completely silent. Then Darrett spots something and yells out as a thick black shadow starts rising up behind the kid like a wall. The whole room goes into a panic, with Milital calling for a doctor and Izu screaming out for Darrett to be careful. This creepy black mist starts filling the floor, and someone yells out asking what the hell it even is while Izu realizes what's happening. She warns everyone that she can feel a heavy amount of dark magic in the air. The shadows on the ground start moving on their own, stretching out and trapping everyone where they stand. Darrett and the group find themselves stuck in the middle of the room, realizing they're completely surrounded by this dark energy. The students are completely gone, just standing there with vacant, blacked-out eyes. Darrett grinds his teeth, looking totally stressed as he tries to process how fast things went south. Izu steps out in front of the group and yells for Darrett and Milital to stay close to her. She calls out her Saintship barrier, and a massive dome of light instantly wraps around them to block out the fog. Darrett tells Izu thanks for the save, while Milital looks at the kids and asks what's even happening to them. Izu looks at the wandering students and explains that dark magic has completely taken over their minds. She points out that the only reason the three of them are still standing is because their weapons have holy attributes. Darrett agrees that light and dark are total opposites, and Milital realizes she can't just attack the kids without thinking. Milital reminds Darrett he has to stay back, but Izu says they're actually going to use Milital's power for this. Izu reaches down and grabs a charm from her belt, getting ready to make her next move. The Saintship Spirit clone spell kicks in, and suddenly a bunch of glowing copies of Milital start appearing all over the place. Darrett just stares at the crowd, totally stunned that there are so many Militals running around now. Izu says the clones can hold the students back, so they should use that time to track down the wizard behind the mind control. She tries to use her magic to find them, but it's no use since her detection is being blocked and she's getting 0 hits. Outside, a massive magic barrier is stretched across the entire academy building, cutting them off from everything. Izu looks down at her staff, staying quiet and looking pretty disappointed that she can't get a lock on the enemy. Milital asks what they should do next, and after Izu's search fails again, Darrett says they'll just have to check everywhere on foot. The three of them start sprinting down the hallway together to begin their search of the school. Izu apologizes for not being stronger, but Darrett tells her it's not her fault, just as Milital notices someone up ahead. They see a guy standing by a door holding a plate of food, and Milital wonders out loud if that's actually Shinya. The guy is just humming and acting totally normal, so Darrett notes that he definitely isn't mind-controlled since there's no black mist. Milital asks what's up with him, and Izu thinks he's delivering food, maybe to the dark magic user Darrett mentioned. As they watch, a huge black void suddenly opens up right in the middle of the hallway wall, which makes Milital yell out in surprise as the guy just disappears right into the stone. The dark portal snaps shut instantly, leaving the hallway looking like nothing ever happened. Darrett doesn't want to just stand there, so he tells the girls they should go take a closer look at that spot. He asks what the deal is, but Milital says it feels like a regular wall, then Izu tells them to leave it to her. Izu presses her hand against the surface and calls out Saintship Reveal, making a huge magic circle glow against the stone. Darrett and Milital just watch her work, waiting to see if she can actually find the way inside. Suddenly the dark entrance rips open again, and Izu happily shouts that it finally opened up for them. Darrett looks over at Izu and says it's exactly what he expected from a head instructor at the academy. Izu leads the way up the stairs, telling them there's no doubt the main hideout is just ahead. Inside the room, Vice Principal Bayer is busy stuffing his face with meat and chewing loudly. He tells the suit guy that the steak was a nice touch, but the guy just tells Bayer he's stuck with the bill. Their lunch gets cut short when a loud voice yells for them to knock it off, which stops both of them in their tracks. They look back to see who's crashing the party, and Izu steps forward, calling out the dark magic she feels and asking Bayer if he's the one controlling the students. Milital doesn't waste any time either, telling Bayer he needs to let those kids go right now. Bayer calls the guy a total fool for not noticing the intruders, while the suit guy just yells at him to shut up after he went through the trouble of bringing food. Bayer has seen enough and fires a dark arrow spell, hitting the suit guy for being so loud and annoying. The suit guy looks completely stunned. He can't believe things turned south so fast, and before he can even move, Milital sends him flying through the doorway with one hit. He lets out a scream as he hits the wall, while he just stays there on the floor, totally knocked out and finished. Bayer is annoyed and tells the group they've done way too much already, but Izu just stands her ground and tells him he's got nowhere left to run. Milital steps in too, demanding that Bayer finally admits to his crimes and just surrenders, but Bayer isn't having any of it. He yells that he won't accept this and that he's going to take over the entire country himself. He starts gathering this dark energy in his hand, looking totally unhinged while he screams out a command for his dark golems to start moving. All these massive rocks start shifting and slamming together on the floor, and then 3 giant stone monsters rise up, towering over everyone. Izu can't believe how big they are, but Bayer just brags about how they're specially made and won't be easy to take down. Bayer stands between his massive stone golems and starts making creepy demands, telling the group that if they lose they have to come to his room, a total freak show move, while Izu doesn't look bothered at all. She just draws her blade and calmly tells him it's too bad for him, because there's absolutely nothing her sword can't cut through. She moves like a blur, calling out her purple lightning technique, and just like that the golems get shredded into a million pieces. The giant stone monsters just crumble into harmless rocks that rain down on the floor, but the fight isn't over yet. Derek gets his hammer ready and gives a shout, while Izu tells him it's time to use that special move of his. But just as they think they've won, this weird dark smoke starts pouring out from the broken stones on the ground. Bayer starts laughing that gross laugh of his, bragging about how he told them he wasn't going to be taken down that easily. He claims he's used dark magic to buff himself up, and suddenly a whole army of golems rises up behind him, making their previous attacks look totally pointless. Milital and the others are visibly stressed now. Izu points out that the things are literally multiplying, which is becoming a real nightmare to deal with. Derek looks up at the new wave of monsters, noticing something strange about them as he starts to say something. Derek notices something familiar about the golems. They've got that same creepy black light they saw when they fought the Iron Bear, and he quickly yells out to Izu and Milital to make sure they're paying attention because he realizes exactly how to win. He shouts that the weak point for every single golem is right in the eyes. Bayer looks pretty tilted that his secret's out, sweating and making a clicking sound like he's losing his cool. But Izu and Milital don't waste a second. They both shout Roger and start sprinting full speed toward the monsters while Bayer completely loses it in the back, screaming for his golems to move in and kill everyone right now. Milital jumps way up into the air, calling out her god thrust move as she comes down hard on them, and she follows it up with a brutal combo that starts smashing through the golem's thick stone armor. On the other side, Izu gets into position and starts charging up her Saintja move looking totally focused as she lets out a lance attack that rips clean through the golems, targeting those weak spots Derek pointed out. Derek isn't about to let the girls have all the fun, so he yells out that he's joining the fight too, while the golem's eye starts glowing with that weird light right before Derek launches himself high into the air, letting out a yell as he prepares to drop the hammer, and he brings the massive tool down with everything he's got, smashing into the target so hard that the air itself seems to crack from the pure force of the hit, and just like that, the golems are reduced to a bunch of useless rocks laying in the dirt. Milital, Derek, and Izu stand tall over the wreckage, looking like a total powerhouse team, which makes Bayer completely lose his mind. He's shaking like a leaf and can barely even get a word out. Milital doesn't show any mercy, looking him dead in the eye and telling him it's over, and Derek follows up by telling the vice principal that his best bet is to just give up right now. Milital looks him right in the eye and tells him his dumb plan to take over the country is officially over. Bayer completely loses it, stammering about how it's all lies while trying to flex his title as vice principal, and he just keeps shaking, whining about how all the hard work he put in is being wrecked by a bunch of fools. The guy won't give up though. He starts muttering from the shadows that he just won't accept this. And Derek, Milital, and Izu all freeze up, looking totally shocked at whatever is happening right in front of them because Bayer is actually transforming. He's grown giant wings and a horn, standing there like a total freak. He stares at his own claws and says it's incredible, feeling all this crazy power rushing through his body. The group can't even believe what they're seeing, and someone yells out asking what the hell is going on as Izu realizes the worst has happened. She says the vice principal has been totally eaten up by dark magic. The guy is turning into a straight-up half-demon right there, laughing and saying that nobody can stop him now. Derek and the girls just stand there, completely floored by the freakish thing Bayer has turned into. The guy starts hovering in the air, bragging about how he's going to rule the country, then changes his mind and says he's taking over the whole world. Izu snaps out of it first, yelling at Derek and Milital to watch their backs because this situation just got way more dangerous. Bayer screams for the king as a massive pillar of dark energy explodes out of him, but Milital isn't about to just stand around and watch. She lunges forward, clashing her blade against the demon's power in a huge burst of sparks while Derek and Izu look on, trying to keep up with how fast the fight is moving. Milital keeps her head down and focuses, whispering Godspeed. As she prepares to end this, she pulls off a crazy move called Swallow Reversal, catching Bayer with a bunch of hits before he can even react. Izu sees her chance and raises her staff, charging up a heavy blast of light magic to finish the job, and she lets it rip with a Saintja strike, a giant glowing fist that slams into the demon and sends him flying. Bayer takes a massive hit to the face, coughing up a mouthful of spit as the impact rattles his whole head. The force of the blast sends him flying across the room like a ragdoll until he slams into the stone wall and drops to the floor, leaving a web of cracks in the masonry behind him. Derek, Milital, and Izu just stand there watching, completely stunned that the fight took such a turn, but the shock isn't over yet, because Bayer starts pushing himself back up like the hit barely even mattered. He looks up with a nasty grin on his face, showing off that he's still got plenty of fight left in him. Izu freaks out, asking why holy attacks aren't working on a demon, but Bayer just tells them it's actually pretty simple. He brags about how his dark magic is just way stronger than any holy weapons they've got. But right then the guy suddenly stops mid-sentence and groans as a weird spark of energy crackles through the air. Bayer screams at the top of his lungs as a massive dark spike drops out of nowhere, crushing him into the ground. Izu points out that a second horn is growing on the left side now, and warns that if this keeps up, there's no way he's turning back into a human. She's completely panicked, yelling that she can't even imagine the kind of disaster that'll happen if he goes full demon. Milital says they have to end this before the transformation goes any further, but Izu warns that at this rate, they might not be able to keep him alive. Derek just stares at the scene, thinking about how it's literally a matter of life or death right now. He thinks about how he doesn't even like Bayer and knows that messing with people like this is wrong, but he still can't stand the thought of him becoming a monster. Because at the end of the day, the guy is still a person, and Derek believes that maybe one day he can actually turn his life around. So instead of just taking him down, Derek decides that he doesn't want to just defeat the guy. He looks over at Milital and tells her straight up that they aren't just going to fight him, they're going to save Vice Principal Bayer. Milital and Izu both look at him, totally caught off guard by what he just said, but Milital just smiles and says that's exactly like him, while Izu gets fired up to go pull the guy out of the demon's grip. The group realizes that hitting Bayer with one powerful blow is the only way to snap him out of the demon transformation, but the vice principal is completely gone, screaming at them to die as someone yells for everyone to split up and move. Izu steps up and readies her staff, telling the others she'll use her magic to lock him down so he can't move. Derek and Milital take the signal and charge straight for the monster while he's distracted, hoping the plan works. Izu casts Saint's capture and glowing white chains wrap around Bayer's body, holding him tight in midair. With the target pinned, Milital and Derek move in perfect sync to deliver their strongest combined attack, both of them putting everything they have into a single strike, shouting for the monster to take this. Milital unleashes her catastrophic cut right alongside Derek's heavy hammer swing, hitting the demon with everything, but a creepy laugh comes from the smoke, and Bayer's voice tells them they've gotten way too close for their own good. Izu sees something coming and screams at the top of her lungs for them to get out of there. Bayer lets out a massive dark spike attack that rips through the air. The force is so strong it snaps the glowing chains holding him like they're nothing, sending sharp black energy flying everywhere. But Izu manages to shout out Saint's protect. A bright shield pops up just fast enough to cover Derek and Milital. Izu looks pretty relieved as she holds onto her magic orb, saying she managed to get the barrier up just in time to save them from getting impaled. Derek looks back at her and tells her she really saved his life there, while they both try to catch their breath for a second. The monster doesn't stop though. Bayer's dark form hovers in the air above them, looking more like a demon than a person now. Derek notices his hits aren't doing anything because the aura is just too thick, and then Izu mentions his magic has shifted from human to straight-up demonic. She explains that this change makes him resistant to the holy attribute, which used to be his biggest weakness, leaving Derek standing there surprised. He repeats the word weakness to himself, looking like he just figured something out. He grips his hammer handle even tighter and tells himself that he's finally got it, because it turns out he was way too focused on elemental types and magic logic to see the real way to take this guy down. Derek stands his ground and grips his hammer, telling the others that he can finally see the weaknesses, not just in the magic, but in the actual materials that make up the monster's physical form. He looks right at the floating demon and shouts that the vice principal's real weakness is his heart, while Bayer just sneers back at them, acting like he's way too powerful to have any flaws. The monster hovers over the group and screams that there's no such thing as a weakness for someone like him. Izu doesn't waste any time and drops a Saint's Sun pillar right on him, making the demon yell about how much of a pain they are. Milital jumps into action next, calling out her Blue Heavens move as she rushes in, leading into a follow-up strike she calls Setsuna that hits the monster hard enough to make him let out a pained groan. The demon gets knocked back and hangs there in the air, looking pretty rattled, and right then, Milital looks back at Derek and calls out to him to make his move. Izu shouts for Derek to finish the guy off once and for all, and right then Derek winds up a massive swing with his hammer, yelling the vice principal's name as he tries to turn him back into a human. The hammer connects with a huge explosion of light that fills the entire room, and as the energy fades, Derek stands there catching his breath, saying they finally need to get things back to normal. Milital and Izu shield their eyes from all the dust and debris flying everywhere while the smoke starts to clear out from the center of the blast. They see Bayer lying on the ground, Totally knocked out, Milital points out the horns are gone and he's finally human again. Milital tells Derek she knew his strike would be crazy strong, but he just brushes it off while Izu starts looking around the floor. And as she keeps searching, Milital calls her name and Derek asks if she's looking for something specific. Just then, the sound of a heavy footstep hits the stone floor, making everyone stop. Derek is down on his knees looking around the floor, mentioning that it feels like he just stepped on something. He picks up a small object and asks what it is, catching Izu's eye immediately. Izu rushes over and begs Derek to let her see it, making him jump back a bit from her energy. As she holds the shard up, she realizes it's a fragment of a dark attribute jewel, and Milital asks why a thing like that would be here. But Izu says it's definitely the reason the vice principal turned into a demon. They look over at the unconscious Bayer, knowing the guy has to have some information on where that jewel came from. Milital decides the best move is to use magic to dig through his memories and find the truth. But outside the building, someone is already making a quick escape. It's the agent, and she's walking off into the trees while cursing Derek under her breath. She's completely furious that her plans are falling apart, and that Derek keeps getting in her way at every single turn. The agent walks alone through the woods, feeling the weight of every single plan of hers falling apart lately. She realizes that even with her special status, there's no way she's getting off easy this time since the master plan has hit a massive wall. And looking completely drained, she starts wondering if death is the only thing waiting for her at the end of this mess. She tries to keep moving, telling herself she needs to get back to her group first. But then she stops in her tracks, something catches her off guard, and she looks back with a look of pure shock because Izu comes flying out from the trees, landing right in front of her to cut off any chance of escape. The agent stares her down, knowing that if this girl found her, it means the situation is way worse than she thought. She asks what kind of business Izu could possibly have with her, and Izu casually mentions that they already went through Bayer's memories. So Izu holds up the dark fragment and calls her out, saying they saw her give the jewel to the vice principal and turn him into a demon. The agent just looks down and calls for Agent, asking Bayer if he's sure his own mind isn't just playing tricks on him. The agent realizes Izu knows way too much her name, the jewel fragments, everything, and she accepts she can't just talk her way out of this one. She tries to play it cool, saying she's in a rush and needs to go, but Izu isn't having it and tells her straight up that she isn't going anywhere. Derek stands there in total shock. Someone shouts his name as the tension in the woods starts to hit a breaking point, and the agent grits her teeth, blaming Derek for every single thing that's gone wrong with her mission lately. She tells Izu to stop playing dumb, but when Izu asks what her actual goal is, the agent just decides that talking is a waste of time. While asking Izu why she's even there, the agent's hand moves to her sword, ready to end this quickly. She lunges forward with a sudden burst of speed, telling Izu that since she's about to die, the details don't really matter. Derek screams out Izu's name, terrified that his friend is about to get cut down before she can even react. The agent grins, thinking she's already won because she knows mages are completely helpless the second they start trying to chant a spell. But Izu calls out her Saintcha Lock spell, and before the agent can even finish her thought, she's wrapped up tight in glowing ropes. The agent stands there in total shock, asking if Izu just used chantless magic. But Izu just calmly explains that the staff Derek made for her is what lets her cast without saying a word, and the agent grits her teeth, telling them it's not over yet while she mumbles Derek's name under her breath. Izu looks down at her and says she should just give up already since she's clearly lost this fight. The agent realizes she's right, she can't even move enough to reach for her hidden knife. So she starts coming to terms with the fact that she actually lost to some random person, while Izu just nods and confirms it's over. But then the agent speaks up, saying there's actually one big fatal reason why she lost, which makes Izu wonder what she's talking about. She admits that her biggest mistake was being a really bad judge of character, because she never expected her boss Bayer to be so completely incompetent at his job, though there's still a catch. She gives a creepy grin and tells them that her group, the Gathering of Reason, is eternal and can never be destroyed. Derek and Izu just stand there looking completely caught off guard. They weren't expecting things to go this way, and the sound of a massive celebration echoes through the forest, sending birds flying everywhere as the news spreads quickly, all the way to the royal palace, where the sun is shining down on the high castle towers. A huge crowd of people has gathered outside the palace walls. Everyone's looking up at the balcony and cheering as loud as they can, and up on that balcony, Queen Serenade stands with Milital and the rest of the group. She looks right at Derek and calls him Lord Durate. She gives him a big, genuine smile, telling him thank you so much for saving the academy from all that evil stuff, but she's not done yet. She goes on to say that he's not just some guy who can forge holy weapons, he actually has the talent to use them too. As all the students start clapping and cheering, the Queen tells him that his eye for finding enemy weaknesses and his overall character are both just incredible. Derek looks a little embarrassed by all the praise, but the Queen makes it clear He's a blacksmith unlike anyone else in this entire era. Derek just smiles back at her, telling the queen that he's honestly just happy to hear her say such nice things. Alina Grossa officially announces that she's appointing Derek as a special instructor at the Glossa Academy of Magic. Derek thanks the headmaster and tells her that as a blacksmith, he couldn't be any prouder than he is right now. Milital chimes in with a big smile, saying she's just happy to see him finally getting the credit he deserves. Izu adds that his life is probably about to get a whole lot busier, so Derek makes sure to thank both of them for the support. Looking out at the view, Derek admits that the only reason he's even standing there today is because of everyone who helped him, but Milital insists they should be the ones thanking him. Derek gets a little shy and says it feels like a heavy burden. Then the queen suddenly speaks up. Queen Serenade tells him she wants to give him her personal thanks one more time, and as a servant brings something out, she asks Derek to accept a special gift as a token of their gratitude. She reaches her hand high up into the air, calling out in the name of Serena Glossa to honor Derek, the man who stepped up and saved their entire country. The queen announces she's giving him the Hammer of Glossa, a special honor that proves he's officially the best blacksmith in the whole kingdom. And as they stand out on the balcony, the entire crowd below starts going wild for them. Derek holds up the new hammer, and the silver metal just sparkles under the sun. All the kids in the crowd are cheering his name, thanking him for stepping up and protecting their country. One kid yells out that he wants to grow up to be just like him. Another one says he's basically a hero for every middle-aged guy out there. Later on, the queen tells Derek they've got a huge banquet ready for him at the palace. He says he'd be honored to go. Alina Grossa walks over to the queen while the rest of the group watches from the side, and the queen looks Alina right in the eyes, telling her she's counting on her for what's coming next. Moving on, it's time for the guys who caused all this trouble to pay up. Signon and Bayer are on the ground shaking as the queen stands over them with a whip, ready to send them to the dungeon. She finally stops, saying that's probably enough whipping for now, leaving Bayer huddled on the floor completely terrified. Alina stands over the two failures with her whip, telling them that since the queen is busy, she's the one in charge of their punishment now. She looks down at them with pure disgust, thinking about how embarrassing it is that her own school actually turned out someone so terrible. She doesn't hold back at all, calling it pathetic that such a huge fool managed to rise up through their ranks. Then she looks at Bayer and asks him about that secretary of his named agent, which makes the little guy start shaking like a leaf. Turns out the reports are in, and that woman was actually a high-ranking member of a group called the Assembly of Reason. Bayer can barely even process the name, just repeating it back while looking like his whole world is falling apart. Alina realizes that's exactly why he had that jewel of darkness, and points out that Ajan was the one who really threw the country into a mess. She keeps going, explaining how the woman was actually setting things up for a demon invasion, and Bayer was just a pawn in the whole thing. Since her crimes are so massive, Bayer realizes he's in deep trouble and tries to scramble away on the floor, but Alina isn't done yet, turning her eyes towards Signon next, who looks like he's seeing his life flash before his eyes. Alina reminds everyone that breaking a legendary sword like the Amatsurugi usually leads to one thing, a death sentence. So she continues by calling out Bayer for throwing away the king's kindness just to help out some shady buyers. She's officially done with him and makes it clear he won't get another chance to put the magic school or the kingdom at risk. But Signon isn't going down without a fight, pointing his finger and yelling that he was just a victim who got tricked by the other guy. He's sweating bullets and desperately trying to talk his way out of the mess he made. Alina doesn't care about his excuses and grips her whip, telling them both that it's time for her to hand out their official punishment. She looks right at Bayer and tells him he's headed straight to prison, then turns her attention to Signon, sentencing him to a life of hard labor deep inside the underground mines. The reality of the situation finally starts to sink in as they realize their lives, as they knew them, are totally over. Alina tells them to get on their feet while they beg and plead for any other kind of punishment, but the guards start dragging them away. Signon is losing it as the guards drag him away, crying out that he won't ever do it again and that he's really sorry. But Alina isn't moved at all, telling him that if he's going to apologize now, he shouldn't have messed up in the first place. She's completely done with him and says he can spend the rest of his life in a cell thinking about what he did. Bayer is also freaking out, yelling for the headmaster and asking why he isn't being treated as if he's innocent, though Alina makes it clear there's no way he's getting off easy. She tells him he needs to go learn more about blacksmithing materials the hard way. He begs the guards to wait and listen to what he has to say, but they just drag him down the stairs anyway, leading into the dark and cramped space of an underground tunnel. Deep inside the caves, a group of miners is busy working with pickaxes and hauling rocks around, and while one of the workers seems to be having a good time in his cart, his partner is looking pretty stressed. Turns out Signon is right there with them, forced into hard labor and looking absolutely miserable about his new life. Down in the mines, things aren't going great as one of the workers yells at a guy for just standing around. It caused a mess to overflow everywhere, so one of the friendly miners just smiles and says his bad, offering to give the guy a hand with the work. The miner laughs and slaps Signon on the back, calling him a precious friend, but Signon isn't having it and snaps at him to stop hitting him, since he's absolutely miserable, complaining that there isn't a single shred of beauty in a place like this. He yells about why he's stuck working in such a filthy hole. The other guys try to cheer him up, telling him not to bottle his feelings up and to just rely on them if he's feeling anxious. They all crowd around him, promising to rehabilitate him and saying that if he stays with them, his wicked heart will finally disappear. The lead miner gives him a big thumbs up, assuring Signon that everyone there is totally on his side. Signon just stands there shaking with rage, barely able to get a word out as he starts to lose his cool, and finally he just screams at them to cut it out and stop touching him without permission. The miner keeps smiling, telling Signon not to worry because he's going to help him fix that attitude of his. But Signon just snaps back that he hates people like them more than anything. As things fade out, Signon starts wondering just how long he's going to be stuck with this deadline. He's basically losing it in the dark, terrified that this might actually be a life sentence for him. The scene shifts to a bright, fancy party where noble guests are hanging out around big decorated tables and enjoying the event. Darrett is there taking it all in when someone suddenly calls his name from behind. A young girl tells him she's going to work her head off to catch up to his blacksmithing skills, while another kid says her dream is to one day cook using tools he crafted. Darrett gets all flustered and tries to play it down, telling them he's really just some old guy, but the kids aren't buying it. They think his modesty is the coolest thing ever. Milital jokes about how he's basically a celebrity now, while Izu promises to study hard so she can do justice to the staff he made her eventually. Milital tells Izu to stay safe and lets her know how great it was to see her again. Izu gives a warm smile and says she was really happy to see Milital again too, but the sweet moment doesn't last long because Milital starts giggling to herself, thinking about how she finally has her teacher all to herself again, except Izu has other plans, politely mentioning that she's actually going to be sticking by Darrett's side for a while. Both Darrett and Milital completely lose it, staring at her in total shock. Izu calmly explains that the headmaster gave her some time off, and she's looking forward to spending every bit of it with him. Milital puts on a fake smile and says she's glad to hear that, while Izu stares right back, making it clear she isn't letting them be alone together. Darrett is stuck in the middle of all this intense energy, totally freaked out by the literal sparks flying between them. Suddenly, a kid in the crowd starts waving his arms and yelling that the musketeers have finally made it back. The whole party stops what they're doing as the news spreads through the room, making everyone start gossiping about how they handled the Northern Stampede in just 1 month. Mostly because their captain is just way too strong for it to be a fair fight. Milital mentions the Musketeers, explaining that they're a brand new special unit for the National Army. It's a group that focuses on using guns instead of traditional swords, and they're already drawing a crowd as they march by. Darrett thinks about how much the world is changing lately, but Izu is way ahead of him, pointing out that the captain is right there and they should go say hi. The name Bayonet rings a bell for Darrett. He stops and tries to remember where exactly he's heard that name before. Suddenly, a voice yells out for the Lord Commander, making both Darrett and Milital jump a bit. The musketeer unit of Grossa stands perfectly still in formation, looking like a serious military force. A girl with a big smile on her face walks up and announces that they've finally made it back from their mission. She salutes Milital and reports that the stampede over in the Toyu grasslands has been completely taken care of, and she's clearly proud of the fact that not a single civilian or soldier got hurt during the whole thing. Darrett gives her a nod and says she did a great job, telling her to just make sure the paperwork is on his desk by tomorrow morning. Bayonet stands there shaking like a leaf with a totally blank look on her face, and Milital notices, asking what's up with her. She suddenly snaps out of it and yells for her papa, looking super happy as she tells him how much she missed him. Darrett's face goes bright red and he starts losing it, yelling at her to stop calling him that in front of everyone, but she's already clung onto him, making him struggle and shout for her to get off while the others just watch the chaos. Once things calm down, she tells him she never expected to run into her dad in the royal capital of all places. She keeps going, saying he really should have told her he was around, and Darrett can only give a tired, nervous laugh. Thinking back on everything, she brings up how becoming the National Army's exclusive blacksmith is a huge step up. And he just replies that it's all thanks to the people around him. He explains it definitely wasn't just his own strength that did it, and Bayonet laughs, saying that humble attitude is classic dad. Just then, a soldier walks up and calls for the captain, making Darrett look over and wonder who the new guy is, so Bayonet decides it's time to introduce him to the rest of the musketeers, proudly telling the group that this is her dad, Darrett. Bayonet introduces herself and Darrett to the squad, letting them know he's her dad and the blacksmith who made her gun. She suddenly grabs someone and pulls him forward, making the poor guy let out a surprised yell as she starts talking him up, calling him the absolute rising star of their entire squad. She tells Derek to be nice to Luca, their vice captain. While Luca gets all flustered and says being called a rising star is a bit much, Derek shakes his hand and introduces himself, and Luca politely replies that it's a real pleasure to meet him. Luca heads back to stand with the other musketeers in line. Derek mentions how many young kids are around, and Bayonet explains that since guns are new, they usually work on their own. She admits that because of the new tech, the rest of the National Army basically treats them like rookies. Bayonet says she needs to step it up to be a better captain, but Derek tells her she's already working plenty hard, and she gets a spark in her eye, telling him she actually has a huge favor to ask her papa, while Luca wonders what she's up to. Bayonet looks right at Derek and tells him she needs him to repair Shinket. She smiles and says there's nobody else she trusts to fix it besides her dad. It's the divine musket Shinket, a rank S weapon with a holy attribute. Derek just stands there completely stunned, not saying a word as he looks at the gun and wonders if this is really the same one he made. Bayonet winks and asks if it brings back memories, joking about how her toy gun evolved, but Derek just looks down and says he knew it, leaving Bayonet looking pretty confused. He thinks to himself that maybe someday he'll finally understand why his work keeps changing like this. Derek tells her he'll take a look at the forge tomorrow to try and fix it fast, and she thanks him. Then Luca asks if they can come watch the repair, and Derek tells him that's totally fine. Derek just stands there with a big smile on his face, thinking about how great it is that the younger generation is actually taking an interest in his work. But the mood shifts fast when Milital and Izu show up right behind him with these scary, shadowed looks on their faces. Milital looks like she's about to lose it, telling him he's been looking way too happy for way too long. And then Izu chimes in with this creepy smile, asking if he really wanted to see Bayonet that badly. Derek starts sweating and waving his hands around, trying to explain himself, but Milital shuts him down instantly, telling him that's definitely not the case. Seeing his chance to escape the awkwardness, Derek just shouts that he's got to go get ready for tomorrow and takes off running, leaving the girls behind as the scene moves to the next morning at the smithy, where the sound of hammers is already filled with energy. Bayonet, Milital, and Luca are all hanging out inside while Derek gets down to business, sitting at his bench to check out the gun. He takes a serious look down the sights, giving it a quick nod as he starts figuring out exactly what needs to be fixed. In the background, the rest of the guys are hard at work, keeping the shop busy with the constant sound of metal hitting metal. Derek takes a close look at the rifle and notices the barrel is actually bent a bit to the right, so he asks Bayonet if her shots have been veering off. She admits that she's definitely noticed it and has been forced to aim left just to hit anything. But that's not the only problem, as Derek points out the mana engravings are wearing down and draining her energy. Bayonet realizes he's totally right, since she's been feeling exhausted a lot faster lately during training sessions. And Derek mentions the whole weapon is basically falling apart from overuse. Bayonet looks over at Luca and wonders if the damage is actually coming from the way he uses his martial arts with it. But Luca just stands there looking completely confused, repeating the words back to her like he doesn't understand the connection at all. To clear things up, Bayonet reaches out and says she'll just show them exactly what she means, so she moves so fast it's basically a blur, catching Luca completely off guard as she zips right past him in the shop. Before he can even react, she's got him pinned from behind with the barrel of the gun pressed hard against his throat, which actually looks pretty cool to Derek, who stands back and watches the display with a look of genuine impressed wonder. Luca starts shaking and tells the captain she can't just scare him out of nowhere like that, but she just brushes it off, telling him he shouldn't be the one acting surprised by her moves. She ends up sighing and complaining about how heavy the standard guns are, wishing there was a way for the whole squad to move a bit more lightly on their feet. Derek decides that as soon as the Sinket is back in working order, he's going to go ahead and give everyone's guns a full upgrade, which makes the whole squad lose it with excitement, and Bayonet even jokingly calls him Papa while thanking him. He tells them he's heading out to grab the materials he needs, and Bayonet tells him to have a safe trip as he heads out the door. Luca is left standing there in complete silence, looking pretty exhausted after everything that just went down, and soon enough, the forge is fired up and roaring with a massive flame inside. Derek gets right to work in the shop, standing over his bench as he starts taking apart the long rifle, taking it slow as he uses a small tool to carefully remove the tiny screws holding the frame together. The metal barrel pops right off the wooden stock with a clean click, and Derek picks up the barrel and holds it up to his eye, squinting through the tube to see how much damage there really is. He stops for a moment to look over the pieces, planning out exactly how he's going to fix this mess. Derek stares at the barrel in silence, checking every single inch. He sees his tools lined up and cracks a small, satisfied smile.